Eleanor Whitmore pressed her bare hands flat against the cold iron door and pushed. Not because she believed it would open, but because she refused to let them see her fall. Behind her, the laughter continued. Crystal glasses clinked. A violin played something light and careless. And the woman who had raised her, or pretended to, stood in the doorway with her arms crossed and her chin lifted, watching Eleanor stumble down the snow-dusted steps of Whitmore Estate, like she was watching something unpleasant being removed from the parlor floor. Before we go any further, if this story already has your heart pounding, please subscribe to this channel and follow Eleanor's journey all the way to the end. Drop the name of your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels. The summer of 1816 had not been kind to the Northeast. People called it the year without a summer, though no one in the Whitmore household spoke of it that way. Margaret Whitmore did not believe in acknowledging difficulty. She believed in controlling it, shaping it, spinning it into something that served her. The cold snaps that killed crops, the gray skies that sat low and heavy over the Hudson Valley, the strange frosts that crept in even during July, these were inconveniences. Nothing more. Eleanor had learned long ago that if Margaret decided something wasn't worth acknowledging, then no one in that house would acknowledge it. That was the rule, and Eleanor had followed it for 7 years. She was 24 years old and had spent the better part of her adult life becoming invisible. Not because she lacked intelligence, not because she lacked strength, but because invisibility, she had discovered, was the only strategy that kept her safe inside Whitmore Estate. Be quiet, be useful, be small. Don't remind Margaret that you exist except when she needs you to. And above all, never ever remind her of who your father was. The evening it all broke apart began like every other evening in that household, a gathering. Margaret called them intimate dinners. Though there was nothing intimate about 40 guests seated at a table so long, Eleanor could barely see the faces at the other end. These were the families of consequence in their county. Landowners, merchants, a judge or two, the kind of men who decided things. And their wives. Always their wives, arranged like decorations around the room, careful and bright and perfectly managed. Eleanor's role at these dinners was specific. Serve quietly, disappear when no longer needed, smile if spoken to, and under no circumstances draw attention to herself or her origins. She had become very good at this, or so she thought. She was moving along the edge of the dining room with a silver tray when she heard it. Margaret's voice cutting clean through the low murmur of conversation. Of course, the estate has been entirely restructured since my late brother-in-law passed, Margaret was saying to the man seated at her right. The old holdings were quite mismanaged, I'm afraid. It took years to bring things back to order. Eleanor's hand tightened on the tray. She kept walking. Dreadful business, the man said. And the daughter, I recall, Whitmore had a daughter. A pause. Deliberate, perfectly timed. Eleanor is still with us, Margaret said in the tone she reserved for discussing mildly inconvenient things. She helps with the household. Nothing more. Nothing else. As though Eleanor were a serving girl who had wandered in off the road, rather than the daughter of the man whose name was carved into the stone above the front gate. Eleanor set the tray down on the sideboard and stared at the wall. She breathed. She reminded herself, be small, be invisible. It is safer this way. She picked up the tray and went back to work. It was near 10 o'clock when the evening shifted. The dinner had ended. The guests had moved into the large front parlor where candles burned in every window, and someone had opened the good brandy. The mood was warm, generous, loosened by food and wine and the particular satisfaction that men of property felt when gathered among themselves. Eleanor was clearing glasses from the dining room when she heard her name. Not spoken gently, not called for help. Announced, like an accusation. Eleanor, come here. Margaret's voice from the parlor doorway. Eleanor set down the glasses and walked to the door. The room was full. She counted 20 people, at least maybe more. Their faces turned toward her with expressions ranging from mild curiosity to barely concealed judgment. Margaret stood in the center of it all, like a woman who owned every piece of furniture in the room. which Eleanor supposed she had spent 7 years trying to ensure that she did. "I've just been made aware of something rather troubling," Margaret said. Her voice was pleasant. It was always pleasant. That was the most frightening thing about her. "It seems there has been some confusion about the nature of certain documents." Eleanor said nothing. She had learned that speaking first was always a mistake. "Mr. Aldridge," Margaret said, gesturing to a thin man near the fireplace, "has been kind enough to bring to my attention a matter involving your father's estate, specifically some papers that were apparently filed with the county clerk before his death." Eleanor went still. "I don't know what papers you mean," she said carefully. "No." Margaret tilted her head. "That's interesting, because Mr. Aldridge seems to believe that your father filed documentation naming you as sole heir to the northern acreage, the Whitmore farmland specifically, the land your grandfather built, the land that has supported this family for 3 generations. The room was very quiet. "He did," Eleanor said. "You knew that. You—" The words came out before she could stop them. Quiet, but certain. The way truth tends to sound when it has been held in for too long. Margaret's expression did not change, but her eyes, something moved behind her eyes, something cold and quick. "I'm sorry," she said. "He told you," Eleanor said. "Before he died. I was there. You were both in his study, and he told you the northern land was to come to me when I turned 24. I heard him say it. I was standing just outside the door." Silence. Then a low murmur moving through the room, like wind through tall grass. Margaret smiled. It was a beautiful, terrible smile. "My dear," she said, "I understand grief can cause us to misremember things. Your father was a kind man, but he was not always in full possession of his faculties in his final months. We all understood that." "He was perfectly clear," Eleanor said. "He was perfectly—" "What he was," Margaret said, cutting clean across her, her voice still pleasant, still smooth, still absolutely controlled, "was a man who loved you and sometimes made promises he was not in a position to keep. I think, Eleanor, that you have spent the last several years telling yourself a story about what you deserve. And I have been patient. I have been extraordinarily patient." She paused. "But tonight in front of our friends, you are going to stand there and call me a liar." "I'm not calling you anything," Eleanor said. "I'm telling you what I heard." "You heard what you wanted to hear." Margaret turned to the room. "You'll forgive me. This is a family matter, and I should have handled it privately. Eleanor." She turned back, and now the pleasantness was entirely gone, scraped away, and what was underneath it was something Eleanor had only seen a handful of times. "I want you to go upstairs. We will discuss this in the morning." "No." The word fell out of Eleanor like a stone dropped in still water. She hadn't planned it. She hadn't known she was going to say it, but it was out now, and the silence that followed it was absolute. Margaret stared at her. "I beg your pardon," she said. "No," Eleanor said again, and her voice was shaking, but she kept it level, kept it together. "I won't go upstairs. I won't wait until morning. I won't wait while you decide what version of this story is most convenient for you. My father left me that land. You know it. I know it, and I am not going to pretend otherwise anymore." For a long moment, nothing happened. Then Margaret moved. Not toward Eleanor. She was too controlled for that, too aware of the room, and what it meant to maintain the performance. Instead, she walked to the parlor door, opened it wide, and turned back with an expression of polite regret. "I think," she said very quietly, "that it's time for you to leave." Eleanor looked at the open door, at the dark hallway beyond it, at the front entrance of the house she had grown up in. "You mean tonight," Eleanor said. "I mean now." Dead. Not one person in that room spoke. Eleanor looked at them. She looked at each face, the wives with their careful expressions, the men with their eyes angled away, studying their glasses, examining the floor, suddenly very interested in the wallpaper. Not one of them, not a single soul. She had lived in this county her whole life. Her father had employed half these families. Her grandfather had built the church where most of them were married. Not one word. She turned and walked out of the parlor. She walked through the hall past the portrait of her father that Margaret had moved to a less prominent wall 3 months after his death, past the coat rack where her good wool traveling coat still hung from when she'd last used it in May. She stopped. She reached for the coat. "Leave it." Margaret's voice from the doorway. Eleanor turned. "That coat was purchased with household funds," Margaret said. "It belongs to the estate." Eleanor looked at her for a long moment. Then she walked out the front door, with nothing but the dress on her back. Check. The night hit her like cold water. July, and still the air had that wrong biting quality that had settled over the whole region since spring. A summer that felt like autumn. The sky was a deep flat gray, and the grounds of Whitmore Estate stretched out around her familiar and foreign all at once. The oak trees her father had planted along the drive. The stone wall along the east pasture. The distant shape of the barn where she'd spent hours as a girl following her father around while he talked about crop yields and soil composition and what the land needed to be healthy. All of it, he had told her. All of this is yours to care for, Eleanor. You understand this land. You understand what it needs. That's not something I can teach you, it's something you were born knowing. She stood at the bottom of the front steps. The door was closed behind her. She had no money, no coat, no destination. She had $40 sewn into the hem of her dress, had put it there 6 months ago, not knowing exactly why, just feeling that. Knowing the money was there helped her breathe a little easier. She'd taken it from her own needlework earnings piece by piece over 2 years. She thought about that now and almost wanted to laugh. She'd known. Somewhere in her bones, she'd known this was coming. She started walking. She had been walking for perhaps 20 minutes down the long drive out through the iron gates that bore her family's name onto the dirt road that ran north toward the county seat when she heard the horse. Not behind her, beside her, just off the road where the tree line began. She stopped. The horse stopped. She turned. He was sitting very still on a dark horse at the edge of the tree line, and she could not make out his face in the low evening light. But she could see the shape of him, broad-shouldered, straight-backed, the kind of stillness that didn't come from laziness, but from discipline. From a man who had learned to control exactly how much space he occupied. He had not come out of nowhere. She understood that immediately. He had been there on that road for some time, and he had seen. "Ma'am," he said. His voice was low and even, not unkind. "You're heading north." "Yes," she said. She kept her voice steady. She would not let him hear how badly she was shaking. "Road north runs about 12 miles to the next town," he said. "After dark with no coat, no horse." He paused, not cruelly, just letting the facts sit where they were. "That's a hard walk." "I'm aware," she said. A silence. "You're Eleanor Whitmore," he said. She stiffened. "You know me. I know of your father," he said. "I was at school with a man who worked his north acreage. Good land, good man from what I heard." She didn't know what to say to that. Nobody had called her father a good man in 7 years. Not to her face. "I don't mean to intrude on your business, miss," the man said. "But I was riding past this road this evening and I saw—" He stopped, measured. "I saw what happened back there, through the parlor window. And I don't think it's right to ride on and leave you standing here in the dark." Eleanor looked at him. "You were watching," she said. "Not intentionally," he said. "I was making my way to the Aldridge property. The road runs past your family's grounds. I pulled up because I thought I saw something wrong. Turns out I was right." She studied him as best she could in the low light. He was older than her, 40 maybe or near it. His clothes were good, but not showy. The horse beneath him was very good, that much she could tell even in the dark, a quality of animal that didn't come cheap. "Who are you?" she asked. He pulled his hat off, set it against his knee. "Nathaniel Blackwood," he said. The name meant something. She had heard it over dinner tables in merchants' conversations, in the careful way people spoke when discussing someone whose opinion had weight. Blackwood. The man who had bought up the old railroad right-of-way along the Hudson. the man who had served with distinction in the war and come home to build something that made men twice his age step aside when he walked into a room. The Duke people called him privately, half in irony, half in genuine deference. There was no such title in America, of course, but there was a kind of authority that operated the same way, and Nathaniel Blackwood had it. "I know who you are," she said. "Then you know I mean you no harm," he said. "And I'm not in the habit of leaving women alone on dark roads." He reached into his coat and held out something, a folded wool jacket. Plain dark functional. "Take this. Whatever direction you decide to go." She looked at the jacket. She thought about saying no. She thought about the 12 miles of dark road and the strange cold July air and the $40 in her hem and the fact that she had absolutely nowhere to be. "I don't need charity," she said. "No," he said. "I don't expect you do. That's a loan. You can return it once you're settled somewhere." She looked at him for another long moment. Then she stepped forward and took the jacket. It was warm, heavier than she'd expected. It smelled like wood smoke and something clean, like open fields. "Thank you," she said. "Yes, ma'am," he said. Neither of them moved. "Miss Whitmore," he said after a moment, "I've got business in the county seat tomorrow. My property, Blackwood House, is about 2 miles east of here. My housekeeper is there and 3 other women on staff, if that matters to you. I'm not offering you anything but a roof and a meal and a place to sit down and think." He paused. "But I'm offering you that if you want it." She thought about it. She thought about what she was walking toward, a 12-mile road, a town where she knew no one, a world in which she had no legal standing that anyone had so far seen fit to recognize. She thought about what she was walking away from, a house that bore her name, but had never, not once in 7 years, felt like hers. 2 miles east," she said. "Yes, ma'am." "And your housekeeper will be there." "Mrs. Pruitt," he said. "She'll be up. She always is." Eleanor looked back once at the dark shape of Whitmore Estate, the lit windows, the faint sound of music drifting out into the strange gray summer night. Then she looked east. "All right," she said. Egg. Mrs. Pruitt was indeed up. She was a small, solid woman of perhaps 60, with silver hair pinned severely back and an expression that had clearly been put on this earth to tolerate no nonsense from anyone, including the man who paid her wages. She opened the door of Blackwood House before Nathaniel had even dismounted, looked at Eleanor with sharp, assessing eyes, and said, "Supper's been kept warm. I'll set another place." She did not ask any questions. Eleanor followed her inside. Blackwood House was not what she had imagined. She had expected something that announced itself, grand entry halls, ostentatious furnishing, the kind of interior that said money before it said anything else. But the house was large without being showy. Good wood, clean lines. Books, an extraordinary number of books, in cases along most of the main hall. A fire in the sitting room that had clearly been burning for hours, well-tended, practical. A house that was actually lived in. That was the difference, she realized. Whitmore Estate had been maintained. This house had been used. Mrs. Pruitt brought food to the kitchen table, cold ham bread still slightly warm, a pot of strong tea, and then disappeared with the tact of a woman who understood exactly when her presence was not required. Eleanor sat. She had not eaten since midday. She ate. Nathaniel came in perhaps 10 minutes later, without the jacket, his sleeves rolled to the elbow the way men did when they'd been tending horses. He poured himself tea, sat down across the table from her, and did not say anything for a while. That was the first thing she noticed about him. Really noticed he did not fill silence with noise. He sat in it comfortably, and he let her be in it comfortably too, and that was, she could not remember the last time someone had done that for her. At Whitmore Estate, silence was always suspicious. Always a gap Margaret was about to fill with something that required Eleanor's careful attention. Here it was just silence. "You don't have to explain anything tonight," Nathaniel said finally. "I wasn't planning to," she said. The corner of his mouth moved. Not quite a smile, but something. "There are 2 rooms prepared upstairs," he said. "Mrs. Pruitt keeps them ready. Take whichever you prefer." Eleanor wrapped her hands around her teacup. You take in strangers often." "No," he said. "Then why?" "Because I watched a room full of people who knew your father, who ate at his table and made their living on land he cultivated, stand there and say nothing while his daughter was put out in the dark with no coat." He looked at her steadily. "And I can't fix that. But I can do something about tonight." Eleanor looked at him. "You were there for a reason," she said. "You mentioned the Aldridge property." "Mr. Aldridge and I have some business dealings," he said. "Nothing that couldn't wait." "Did it have anything to do with—" She stopped. The papers Margaret had mentioned. Mr. Aldridge, with his thin face and careful eyes, suddenly very interested in estate documents. "Miss Whitmore," Nathaniel said, and his voice was very even, very deliberate. "I don't know exactly what's in those documents your stepmother was referring to tonight. But I know what I've heard from men I trust, and I think you might want to talk to a lawyer, a specific one man named Calloway in the county seat. He was a friend of your father's." Eleanor stared at him. "How do you know that?" she said. "Because your father came to me 3 years ago," Nathaniel said, "and asked me to remember that conversation if it ever seemed necessary." The kitchen was very quiet. "He came to you," Eleanor said slowly. "He did." "Why?" Nathaniel was quiet for a moment. "Because he'd run out of people he trusted in his own county," he said. "And because someone had told him I was a man who kept his word." Eleanor sat with that for a long time. Her father, in the last years of his life, she had known he was worried. She'd seen him at his desk late at night, seen the way he watched Margaret when he thought no one was looking, seen the way he had started to hold on to Eleanor's hands a little too long when she said goodnight, as though he was memorizing something. She had not known he was this worried. She had not known he had gone outside the family, outside the county. She had not known he had gone to this man. "What did he ask you to remember?" she said. Nathaniel looked at her. "He asked me to remember that Eleanor Grace Whitmore was the rightful heir to the northern acreage of the Whitmore estate, that he had filed the appropriate documentation with the county clerk before his illness progressed, and that if anyone ever tried to tell her otherwise—" He paused. "He asked me to make sure she knew the truth." Eleanor's throat tightened. She pressed her hand flat on the table. Breathed. "He knew," she said, not a question. "He suspected," Nathaniel said carefully. "He hoped he was wrong." "He wasn't wrong," Eleanor said. "No, ma'am, I don't believe he was." Nah. She did not sleep well that night. She lay in the clean, plain room Mrs. Pruitt had shown her to on a bed that was simple and comfortable, and nothing like the bed she'd had at Whitmore Estate. And she stared at the ceiling and thought about her father. He had been a tall man, her father, broad across the shoulders with hands that were always a little rough no matter how many times he tried to present himself as something more refined than a working farmer. He had loved the land with a plainness that embarrassed Margaret, and a sincerity that Eleanor had always understood even as a girl. "You understand this land," he had told her. "That's not something I can teach you." He had known. He had always known. And he had tried to protect her. He had gone to a stranger, a powerful, difficult stranger, and asked him to carry a piece of the truth for safekeeping, like putting something valuable in a bank before the flood came. And the flood had come, and the bank had held. She turned onto her side and looked at the window. The July night outside was still strange cooler than it should have been, the sky that flat, heavy gray that had settled over everything since spring. The year without a summer, they were calling it. She thought, "I know how that feels." And then, almost against her will, she thought of Nathaniel Blackwood's voice saying, "He asked me to make sure she knew the truth." She pressed her face into the pillow. She did not cry. She was 24 years old, and she had spent 7 years practicing the discipline of not crying in places where it could be used against her. But she felt something shift in her chest, some weight she had been carrying for so long that she'd stopped noticing it loosening just slightly around the edges. Her father had not forgotten her. He had not simply hoped for the best. He had made a plan. She was the plan. In the morning, Mrs. Pruitt made porridge and did not comment on the fact that Eleanor had been crying, though Eleanor suspected she was probably aware of it. Nathaniel was already up. He was at the desk in the small room off the main hall when Eleanor came downstairs, and he was reading papers, and he looked up when she appeared in the doorway. "Morning," he said. "Good morning," she said. He studied her for a moment. "Mrs. Pruitt makes very good porridge," he said, "and she tends to take it personally if you don't eat it." Eleanor almost smiled. "I'll keep that in mind." She sat down at the kitchen table. Mrs. Pruitt appeared with a bowl and a look that said, "Eat it," without any words at all. Eleanor ate it. Nathaniel came in after a few minutes with his papers and sat down across from her again, and it was oddly comfortable, oddly ordinary. The morning light coming through the kitchen window, and the sound of the household beginning to move around them. "I'd like to go to the county seat," Eleanor said when she'd finished eating. "To speak with Mr. Calloway." Nathaniel nodded. "I can take you. I've got business there myself." "I'm not asking you to." "I know you're not asking," he said. "I'm offering. There's a difference." She looked at him. "You keep doing that," she said. "Doing what?" "Making a distinction between asking and offering." He considered this. "It matters," he said. "Asking puts a burden on you. Offering puts it on me. I'd rather it be on me." Eleanor did not know what to say to that either. She was learning that Nathaniel Blackwood said things that required a moment to sit with. Things that sounded simple, but were not exactly. "Why?" she said. He looked at her steadily. "Because your father asked me to look out for you if it came to that. And because what I saw last night wasn't right. And because—" He stopped, picked up his cup. "Because it costs me nothing and might cost you everything if I don't." Eleanor nodded. "All right," she said. "Thank you." "Yes, ma'am," he said. The road to the county seat ran along the eastern edge of the river, and in a summer that was supposed to be warm. It was strangely beautiful in its wrongness. The trees a little too dark. The light a little too thin. The whole landscape operating at a slight remove from what it should have been. Eleanor rode beside Nathaniel. He had offered her a horse, one of his, a steady gray mare that moved easily and did not require managing. Eleanor had not ridden in some time. Margaret had deemed it an unnecessary expense to maintain a horse for her, but her body remembered, and the mare was patient. They did not talk much on the road. But the silence was the same kind as the night before, comfortable, inhabited, the kind of silence you could rest in. She was aware of him, though. Of the way he moved, the way he watched the road ahead, with the same particular stillness she'd noticed the night before. He was a man who missed very little. She could feel that without being able to fully articulate it, a quality of attention trained and habitual. "Can I ask you something?" she said about halfway to town. "Yes," he said. "What exactly did my father say to you when he came to you?" Nathaniel was quiet for a moment. "He said that he loved his daughter very much, and that she was the most capable person he knew, and that the world was going to try very hard to convince her otherwise, and that he needed someone who would be able to remind her of the truth when the time came." Eleanor stared at the road ahead. "He said capable," she said. "Those were his words," Nathaniel said. "He said capable, and then he said something else. He said seen, that he needed someone who could see her properly, the way he did." Eleanor pressed her lips together. "He never told me any of this," she said. "No," Nathaniel said. "I expect he was afraid that if he did, you'd spend the next years of your life braced for disaster instead of living." She thought about that. "He was probably right," she admitted. "He struck me as a man who was usually right about his daughter," Nathaniel said. Mr. Calloway's office was on the second floor of a building that also housed a printer's shop and a small law firm at the end of the main street of the county seat. The stairs were narrow, and the landing smelled like old paper and ink, and when they knocked, a voice from inside said, "Come in a tone of mild irritability that did not change much when he actually saw them. He was a man of perhaps 70, small and sharp, with the kind of white hair that had clearly once been very dark and had not entirely forgiven the transition. He looked at Eleanor for a long moment when Nathaniel introduced her. Then he said, You look just like him." "So I've been told," Eleanor said. He looked at Nathaniel. "She know everything." "She knows enough," Nathaniel said. "She'd like to know the rest." Calloway nodded. He went to a cabinet behind his desk, old, battered, apparently organized according to some system that made sense only to him, and pulled out a folder of papers. He set them on the desk. He sat down. "Your father filed these with me 18 months before he died," Calloway said. "County record copy is with the clerk, but there's been some trouble with the clerk's records. Something I was going to look into regardless." His eyes were very direct. "This is your father's personal copy, the original, with his signature and 2 witnesses." Eleanor leaned forward. "May I?" she said. He pushed the papers toward her. She read them. She read them carefully, the way her father had taught her to read any document, every word, every clause, every name. Her father had believed that most people signed things without reading them, and that this was how most people ended up in difficulty. Read everything he had told her, even if it takes time, especially if someone is trying to rush you. The documents were clear, simple even. The northern acreage, 847 acres of Whitmore farmland, including the river property and the orchard and the 2 tenant farms, passed to Eleanor Grace Whitmore upon her 24th birthday, independent of any other arrangement in her name alone, with no power of divestiture held by any other member of the family. She had turned 24 in March. She had been 24 for 4 months. "These are valid," she said. "Yes," Calloway said. "And she knows about them," Eleanor said. "Margaret. She knew my father filed these." Calloway's expression shifted slightly. "I believe she did." "Yes." "And she's been managing the northern acreage since March," Eleanor said. "Collecting the tenant rents." "That would appear to be the case," Calloway said. Eleanor set the papers down on his desk. She sat for a moment. Then she said very quietly, "What are my options?" Calloway looked at her, then at Nathaniel, then back at her. "You have a valid legal claim," he said. "You have original documentation. You have the right to present this to the county court and demand restoration of the property. And if she contests it, then we go through the court, which takes time." He paused. "But the documentation is very clean, Miss Whitmore. Your father was very careful." "He was," she said. "He was always very careful." She looked at the papers for another moment. Then she looked up at Nathaniel, who had said nothing through this entire conversation, who had sat in the chair in the corner of the room and let her handle it entirely, as though she'd asked him to, though she hadn't. He met her eyes. "What do you want to do?" he said. "Not here is what I recommend. Not here is what will work best. What do you want to do?" She thought about last night. The parlor full of people who said nothing. The coat she'd left on the rack. The door closing behind her. She thought about her father's hands. The rough knuckles. The way he'd pressed her hands between both of his when she was small and said, "This land knows you, Eleanor. You're made of the same stuff." "I want to go home," she said. The word surprised even her. Calloway nodded slowly. "Then we'll start the process today." Oh. They left his office as the morning was moving toward noon, and Eleanor stood at the top of the narrow staircase for a moment, looking out at the main street of the county seat. The ordinary business of an ordinary day, people moving in and out of shops, a cart of goods making its slow way along the road, the thin gray summer light doing its best. Nathaniel came to stand beside her. "You all right?" he said. "I don't know yet," she said honestly. "Fair enough," he said. "I want to ask you something else," she said. "And I need you to answer me honestly." "Yes, ma'am." "Last night," she said, "when you came to that road, was that a coincidence?" A pause. "No," he said. She turned to look at him. "I'd been watching the Whitmore situation for about 6 months," he said. "Heard some things that concerned me. I was going to come to you directly, but I was trying to find the right way to approach it. And then last night..." He stopped. "Last night they made it easier than I expected." "You mean they threw me out?" she said. "Yes," he said. "I mean that." She studied him. You could have come to me sooner. I could have, he said. I didn't want to frighten you, or make you feel watched, like something was closing in. I felt like something was closing in for 7 years, she said. I know that now, he said. I'm sorry I waited. Eleanor looked at him for a long moment. Did my father ask you to watch out for me? She said. Or did you decide to on your own? Nathaniel met her eyes. Both, he said. He asked. And when I understood what was happening to you, I decided he was right to ask. She nodded, slowly. Then I suppose, she said, I owe you something. No, he said immediately. You don't owe me anything. The jacket, she said. I said I'd return it. The corner of his mouth moved again, not quite a smile, but closer this time. Keep it, he said. It's July. Lord knows you might need it this year. Eleanor looked back at the street below. She thought about Whitmore Estate, the iron gates with her family's name, the oak trees her father planted, the fields he had loved, the land that was by law and by right hers. She thought about Margaret standing in that doorway, with her arms crossed and her chin lifted. She thought about the silence of 40 people who had known her father and said nothing. She thought about what it would mean to go back, not as the girl who helped with the household, not as the inconvenient reminder of the man Margaret had outlasted, as herself, as the person her father had known she was. Mr. Blackwood, she said. Miss Whitmore, he said. I believe, she said, that I am going to need a very good lawyer, and possibly a few other things. I know a few very good lawyers, he said, and I have access to a few other things. She turned to look at him again. Why? She said. Really. Not because my father asked you, not because it was the right thing to do in the moment. Why are you still here today doing this? Nathaniel Blackwood looked at her. He was quiet for a moment, not evasive, just careful the way he was about everything. Because your father was right, he said finally. About everything he told me, and because the last 7 years were a waste, and I'd like not to waste any more time. Eleanor held his gaze. Then she turned and started down the stairs. Then let's not, she said. She did not know, walking down those narrow stairs on an ordinary gray July morning, what the next months would cost her. She did not know how far Margaret would go, how many favors she would call, and how many men who had smiled at Eleanor across dinner tables would find reasons to look the other way when the moment came. She did not know that the northern acreage would become a battlefield, that the county clerk's records would be found to have certain convenient gaps, that Margaret's lawyer was a man with powerful friends and very few scruples, that there would be nights in the months ahead when Eleanor sat at the desk in the borrowed room at Blackwood House and stared at her father's papers and felt for the first time in her life the particular terror of being truly alone in a fight. She did not know any of that yet. All she knew, stepping out into the thin July light with Nathaniel Blackwood's footsteps quiet behind her, was that for the first time in 7 years, she was walking toward something. Not away from it, toward it. And she was going to need every piece of herself to get there. The process of reclaiming what was rightfully hers turned out to be nothing like Eleanor had imagined. She had imagined it clean. A paper filed, a truth acknowledged, a wrong corrected. She had read the documents in Calloway's office with her father's signature on them and thought, this is clear. This should be simple. It was not simple. Within 3 days of their visit to Calloway's office, Margaret had retained a lawyer of her own, a man named Hargrove, from a firm in the city, whose reputation for delay and obstruction was apparently so well established that Calloway muttered something under his breath when he heard the name that Eleanor did not ask him to repeat. Within a week, those convenient gaps in the county clerk's records had been identified, examined, and declared by Hargrove to be evidence of the documents' invalidity. Not their absence, the documents were clearly there, clearly filed, clearly dated. But Hargrove argued that the filing had been procedurally irregular, that certain witnesses could not be located, that the timing of the documents filed during the period of her father's illness raised questions about his capacity. His capacity. Eleanor sat in Calloway's office on a Thursday afternoon in late July and listened to Calloway read from Hargrove's written response, and she felt something cold settle in her chest. "He's saying my father was not of sound mind," she said. "He's suggesting it as a possibility to be explored," Calloway said in the careful way lawyers had of saying things that were worse than they sounded. "It's a standard argument in estate disputes. It doesn't mean—" "He knew exactly what he was doing," Eleanor said. "He was more lucid in his final year than Margaret has ever been in her life." "I know that," Calloway said. "The problem is, we need people who will say so. People who knew him, who can speak to his state of mind in the period those documents were signed." "There were witnesses to the signing," Eleanor said. "Yes, one of them has since moved west. We're attempting to locate him. The other—" Calloway paused. "The other is a man named Aldridge." Eleanor went very still. "James Aldridge," she said. "Who was at that dinner?" "The same." "Who was sitting at Margaret's right hand?" Calloway looked at her steadily. "The same," he said again. Eleanor sat with that for a moment, the pieces arranging themselves. Aldridge at that dinner, the night everything broke open. Aldridge with his thin face and careful eyes. Aldridge who was apparently in business dealings with Nathaniel Blackwood. "Can Hargrove use him?" she said. "He can call him as a witness to dispute the documents," Calloway said. "Whether a court believes a man who signed the documents is now disputing them, that's a harder case to make. But it creates confusion, and Hargrove's specialty is confusion." Eleanor stood up. She walked to the window. She stood there with her back to Calloway for a moment, looking at the street below, at the perfectly ordinary business of an ordinary afternoon, and she thought very carefully about what she was going to say. Then she turned around. "What do we need?" she said. "Specifically, what does our case need that it doesn't have right now?" Calloway thought for a moment. "Two things," he said. "We need to locate Thomas Wren, the first witness who moved west, and we need someone with enough standing in this county to speak credibly to your father's character and state of mind. Someone Hargrove can't intimidate or discredit." Eleanor thought about that. Then she thought about a man who sat in the corner of a lawyer's office and said nothing and let her handle everything. "I need to speak with Mr. Blackwood," she said. "Doctor." She found him at his desk, as he usually was in the late afternoon, surrounded by papers that had to do with the railroad business that had built most of what he owned. She had learned in the past week that the railroad was not the only thing. There were also land holdings, timber interests, a shipping concern, and something involving a mill in Vermont that Mrs. Pruitt referred to with a dark sort of satisfaction whenever it came up, as though the mill had once behaved badly and been dealt with accordingly. He looked up when she came in. "Aldridge," she said without preamble. "You have business with James Aldridge." Nathaniel set down his pen. "Some," he said. "He witnessed my father's documents," she said. "And now Hargrove is going to use him to say my father wasn't of sound mind." Nathaniel was quiet for a moment. "Sit down," he said. "I'd rather stand." "All right," he said. He leaned back in his chair. "Tell me exactly what Calloway said," she told him. All of it quickly, without embellishment. She had found in the past week that Nathaniel preferred information presented plainly, not softened, not cushioned, just the facts set down in order so he could work with them. It was something she understood, having been raised by a man with the same preference. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "Aldridge won't testify against those documents," he said. "How can you be certain?" "Because James Aldridge is a man who borrowed a significant sum from me 18 months ago and has not yet been in a position to repay it," Nathaniel said. "And because I had a conversation with him last week that made certain things clear." Eleanor stared at him. "What things?" "That I had a particular interest in the Whitmore case," he said. "And that men who make things difficult in cases I have an interest in tend to find their existing financial situations becoming somewhat more complicated." She looked at him for a long moment. "You threatened him," she said. I clarified the situation, Nathaniel said. There's a difference. Is there? A threat is imprecise, he said. A clarification is very specific. Aldridge understood exactly what I meant and exactly what he needed to do. And what does he need to do? Decline to appear as Hargrove's witness, Nathaniel said. Cite prior commitments, which he will discover he has. Eleanor sat down. She hadn't planned to, but she found that her legs had made the decision for her. You did that already, she said. Before I came in here. I did it last week, he said. After I spoke with Calloway. You spoke with Calloway without telling me. I spoke with Calloway because I wanted to understand the full scope of what we were dealing with before I said anything to you that might be premature. He met her eyes. I wasn't trying to go around you. I was trying to get information. And it didn't occur to you to tell me what you'd found. I was going to tell you this evening, he said. You came to me first. Eleanor pressed her hands flat on her knees. She breathed. I need you to tell me things when you find them out, she said. Not after you've already acted on them. Not when it's convenient, when you find them out. He looked at her steadily. You're right, he said. I'm sorry. The apology was simple and immediate, which somehow made it worse because she couldn't be angry at it. Fine, she said. What else did Calloway tell you that you haven't told me? The first witness, Thomas Wren, is in Ohio. Calloway has a man trying to locate him. It will take time. He paused. There's something else. Tell me. The northern acreage, he said. The tenant farms. Margaret has been collecting rent since March, as you suspected. But she's also entered into an agreement with a land buyer from the city, a man who wants to break up the farmland and develop it. The agreement is conditional on her clear legal title. Eleanor felt the cold thing in her chest tighten. She's trying to sell it, she said. She's trying to sell it before the court case resolves, he said. If she can establish a sale to a good faith buyer, the legal situation becomes considerably more complicated for you. It's possible, not certain, but possible that recovering the land becomes difficult, even if you win the title question. How much time do we have? Calloway believes the buyer's deadline is 60 days, he said. That's his estimate. It could be less. 60 days. Eleanor looked at the far wall. 60 days to locate a witness in Ohio, fight a lawyer who specialized in delay, and prevent her stepmother from selling the land out from under her. All right, she said. All right, Nathaniel repeated. What else do we need, she said. Besides Wren, what else strengthens our case? He looked at her carefully, the way he sometimes did, like he was doing a rapid and quiet recalibration. She had noticed this about him, the way he adjusted continuously and without fuss to whoever she turned out to be in a given moment. He had expected, she thought, that the news about the land sale would hit her harder, would slow her down. He was recalibrating. A character witness with standing, he said. Someone the court respects. Someone Hargrove can't dismiss. You, she said. Possibly, he said. Though I should tell you my appearing in your case may complicate things. Why? Because I'm not a neutral party, he said. Hargrove will argue that I have an interest in the outcome. Do you? She asked. A pause, longer than his pauses usually were. Yes, he said. Eleanor looked at him. Because of my father, she said. Because he asked you. Nathaniel held her gaze. Among other reasons, he said. She didn't ask him to explain that. Something in her chest said it wasn't the moment, and she had learned in the past week to trust that instinct. Then we need someone else, she said. Someone with standing. Someone who knew my father, who can speak to his character, who isn't connected to you. She paused. Or to Margaret. Judge Hartley, Nathaniel said. He knew your father for 20 years. He's retired, but his name still carries weight. And he owes me nothing he never has. He's too careful for that. Would he do it? I don't know, Nathaniel said. But I know he's a man who dislikes seeing things done wrong. And I know he'll at least listen. Then we go to him, Eleanor said. I'll arrange a meeting. I'll go to the meeting myself, she said. Not through you. I'll go and speak to him directly." Nathaniel looked at her for a moment. Then he nodded. "That's the right call," he said. "I think it will matter to him you coming in person." "Good," she said. She stood up. "Thank you for telling me about the land sale." "I should have told you sooner," he said. "Yes," she said. "You should have." She moved toward the door, then stopped. "Mr. Blackwood." "Miss Whitmore, when you say you have an interest in the outcome," she said, still facing the door, "of other reasons, I need to know if that interest is going to complicate things for me, legally or otherwise." A beat of silence. "I don't believe it will complicate things for you," he said carefully. "If anything—" He stopped, tried again. "My interest in the outcome is in your favor. That's all I mean." Eleanor stood at the door a moment longer. "All right," she said, and went out. Judge Hartley lived in a house at the edge of town that was tidy and well kept and spoke of a man who did not feel the need to impress anyone. He received Eleanor on a Tuesday morning in a sitting room with a great many books and a dog of advanced age that was asleep in the corner and did not stir when she came in. Hartley himself was 72, with sharp eyes behind wire-framed glasses, and he looked at Eleanor the way Calloway had looked at her, with a recognition that had nothing to do with her personally, but with something she carried in her face. "You look like your father," he said before she sat down. "People keep telling me that," she said. "It's meant kindly," he said. "Your father was a handsome man, and a good one. Sit down, Miss Whitmore." She sat. She had thought about this meeting. She had thought about how to begin it, what to establish, how to present the case in a way that would be compelling without being desperate. She had prepared arguments, organized her points, rehearsed the sequence. And then she had decided walking here this morning to set all of that aside. "Judge Hartley," she said, "I'm not here to persuade you of anything. I'm here because you knew my father, and because I need someone who can say what kind of man he was when it matters. I'm not asking you to judge the case. I'm asking you to tell the truth about the man." Hartley looked at her over his glasses. "Calloway told me you might come," he said. "He said you were a man who disliked seeing things done wrong," she said. "He's not wrong about that," Hartley said. "My stepmother is trying to sell my father's land before a court can decide it belongs to me," she said. "Her lawyer is going to argue that my father wasn't capable of making his own decisions when he filed the documents that protect my inheritance. I know what he was capable of. I was there." She looked at him directly. "I need someone else who was there, or as near to it as possible. Someone who spent 20 years watching him make decisions." Hartley was quiet for a moment. The dog in the corner shifted in its sleep. "Margaret Whitmore is not a stupid woman," Hartley said. "No," Eleanor agreed. "She's not. She's been planning this for a long time," he said. "I've been watching her manage things since before your father died, and I had my suspicions about the direction she was heading. I should have acted on them sooner." Eleanor looked at him. "Why didn't you?" He was quiet for a moment. "Because your father asked me not to," he said. "He told me he had put measures in place. He asked me to let those measures work without interference because he believed that Margaret would behave worse if she felt she was being watched." He paused. "I respected his judgment. I'm not certain now that I was right to." "He put Nathaniel Blackwood in place," Eleanor said. "He told me as much," Hartley said. "Blackwood's a good man. I've had my doubts about some of his methods, but I've never had doubts about his character." "His methods," Eleanor said. Hartley gave her a look that was dry and knowing. "He's a man who gets things done," he said, "sometimes in ways that aren't entirely conventional. Your father understood that about him and considered it a feature rather than a problem." Eleanor thought about the conversation with Aldridge. I clarified the situation. She thought about the quiet way Nathaniel had dealt with things before telling her the way he moved around problems with the efficiency of a man who had been solving problems since before she knew what they were. A feature rather than a problem. She wasn't sure yet whether she agreed. "Will you testify?" she said. Hartley looked at her for a long moment. "I will tell the truth about your father," he said. "I will tell any court, any man, any room full of people, what kind of man Richard Whitmore was, and what his mind was like in his final years. I can do that without reservation. He paused. But I want you to understand something first. Yes, she said. This will get harder before it gets easier, he said. Margaret has friends in this county, men who owe her favors, men who are more comfortable with the world as it was arranged before you started making demands on it. They will not all behave well. I know that, she said. Do you? He looked at her steadily. A week ago, you were the woman who helped with the household. Now you're the woman challenging a widow for her late husband's property. In the eyes of some people in this county, not the right people, but people with influence, those two things say very different things about your character. Eleanor met his eyes. Then let them say it, she said. I'm not interested in managing what people think of me. I'm interested in getting back what belongs to me so I can do something useful with it. Hartley held her gaze. Then he smiled a small, real smile that changed his face considerably. You sound like him, he said. That's exactly how he used to talk. Good, she said. All right, he said. I'll testify. She told Nathaniel that evening. He was on the front porch when she got back, standing with a cup of coffee, looking out at the grounds in the gray summer late light. He turned when he heard her come up the steps. He'll do it, she said. Something crossed Nathaniel's face, quick and quiet gone, before she could fully identify it, but she thought it might have been relief. Good, he said. That's very good. He said you're a man who gets things done in ways that aren't entirely conventional, she said, watching his face. That's a fair assessment, Nathaniel said. He also said my father considered it a feature, she said. A pause. Your father was a practical man, he said. He was, she agreed. She sat down on the porch steps. After a moment, Nathaniel sat down too, not beside her exactly, but near enough. The evening was doing its strange gray thing, that peculiar summer light that felt like it was always about to rain without ever quite doing it. Tell me something, she said. If I can, he said. The night you found me on the road, she said. You said you'd been watching the situation for 6 months. You said you were going to come to me directly. She paused. What were you going to say? He was quiet for a moment. I was going to tell you about the documents, he said. About what Calloway was holding. I was going to tell you that you had options you might not know about. That's all, she said. Another pause. Longer. No, he said. I was also going to tell you, he stopped, looked at his coffee cup. I was going to tell you that your father asked me to look out for you, but that wasn't the only reason I had been paying attention to what was happening at Whitmore Estate. Eleanor looked at him. He was not looking at her. What was the other reason? She said. I'd heard things about you, he said, from various people. The way you'd managed the household accounts, the way you'd handled the tenant disputes when Margaret was too busy or too disinterested to deal with them herself, the way the workers on the estate talked about you when they didn't think anyone important was listening. He paused again. You have a reputation, Miss Whitmore. It's just been confined to people who don't generally get asked their opinion. Eleanor thought about that. The tenant farmers, the household staff, the people who were not at the dinner table, but who were in the kitchen, the fields, the outbuildings, people who saw everything. I didn't know they noticed, she said. People always notice, he said. They just don't always say so. She looked at her hands. What did they say? That you were fair, he said. That you listened. That when something went wrong you fixed it instead of looking for someone to blame. That you understood the land the way your father had. He paused. And that it was a waste. A waste. She felt that word land somewhere deep. My father used to say I was capable, she said. I never entirely believed him. I thought he was just being kind. He wasn't being kind, Nathaniel said. He was being accurate. Eleanor looked at him, then turned and looked at him directly, the way she sometimes avoided doing, because she found that when she looked at him directly, it was harder to maintain the careful, practical distance she had decided was appropriate. "Why does it matter to you?" she said. "What I am, what I'm capable of. Why does any of this matter to you?" He met her eyes. He didn't look away. "Because your father was right about you," he said, "and because I've spent a career making judgments about people and property and value, and I know what I'm looking at when I see it." He stopped, and then quieter. "And because watching what that woman did to you," he stopped again, set his jaw. "It's not right, any of it. And I have the means to do something about it, and your father asked me to, and I would have done it regardless." Eleanor looked at him for a long moment. "You're not a simple man, Mr. Blackwood," she said. "No," he agreed. "I'm not. Neither was my father," she said. "He was the most complicated man I ever knew. He drove Margaret absolutely mad with it." Something crossed Nathaniel's face at that something that was not quite amusement, but was in the neighborhood of it. "I suspect I have that effect on certain people as well," he said. "I suspect you do," Eleanor said. They sat for a moment in the gray evening. Somewhere in the outbuildings, a horse moved and settled. Mrs. Pruitt's lamp was on in the kitchen, a warm square of light against the gathering dark. "We need to find Thomas Wren," Eleanor said, because she could feel the conversation moving somewhere she wasn't ready to let it go, and because finding Thomas Wren was the most pressing thing on her list, and because she was a practical woman. "Calloway's man has a lead in Cincinnati," Nathaniel said, allowing the shift without any visible reaction. "I'm sending my own man as well, faster horse, better resources. If Wren is in Ohio, we'll find him." "How long?" 2 to 3 weeks if we're lucky." "We have 60 days, she said. "Or less." "Then we'd better be lucky," he said. "And if we're not," she said. Nathaniel looked at her. "We find another way," he said simply. "There's always another way." Eleanor nodded. She stood up, brushed off her skirt, and moved toward the door. "Mr. Blackwood," she said. "Miss Whitmore." When Hartley said your methods were not entirely conventional, she said, was he talking about Aldridge or other things as well? A pause. "Probably both," Nathaniel said. "Were any of those other things relevant to my case?" she said. Another pause. "Some of them might be," he said carefully. "In time." She looked at him for a moment. "I want to know about them," she said. "When you decide I should know, not after the fact, when it's still relevant." "I understand," he said. "Good night, Mr. Blackwood." "Good night, Miss Whitmore." 2 days later, Margaret came to Blackwood House. Not alone. She came with Hargrove and with a man Eleanor didn't recognize. Wide-shouldered, watchful, the kind of man who was paid to be present rather than to speak. Eleanor was in the kitchen with Mrs. Pruitt when she heard the knock, and something in the quality of the sound made her go still. 3 sharp raps precisely spaced. Margaret's knock. She'd know it anywhere. She was at the door before Mrs. Pruitt could get there. Margaret stood on the front step with the expression she wore when she was trying to look like she was doing someone a favor. Hargrove was a step behind her smooth-faced correct. The wide-shouldered man was a step behind Hargrove. "Eleanor," Margaret said as though she were visiting for tea. "Mrs. Whitmore," Eleanor said. Margaret's expression shifted just slightly. She had not expected Eleanor to use her married name rather than her given name. It was a small thing, but Margaret noticed small things. She noticed everything. That was her particular gift. "May we come in?" Margaret said. "No," Eleanor said. Another small shift. "I've come to speak with you about the matter before the court," Margaret said. "I think there may be room for an arrangement that works for both of us." "I'm listening," Eleanor said. She did not move from the doorway. "This situation is becoming unpleasant for everyone," Margaret said. "A court case of this nature, the attention it brings, the things that come out in testimony." She paused significantly. "They're not good for anyone, including you." "Meaning," Eleanor said. "Meaning that Hargrove has done extensive research," Margaret said. "And there are things in your father's financial history that are not flattering. Things that reflect on his judgment. Things that if they were to come out in open court might do lasting damage to your father's memory. She paused. I don't want that. I don't think you want that. Eleanor looked at her. She looked at the smooth, controlled face, the carefully positioned regret, the offer wrapped in a threat wrapped in concern. What are you offering? She said. A small settlement, Margaret said. A reasonable sum. Enough for you to establish yourself comfortably elsewhere, in exchange for withdrawing the court case and signing over any claim to the estate. Elsewhere. A reasonable sum. Withdrawing. Signing over. 7 words in 2 sentences to dispose of everything her father had built. No, Eleanor said. Margaret's eyes went flat. Eleanor, I said no. Eleanor said, there is no arrangement, there is no settlement, there is a court case, and it will proceed, and the documents my father filed will be considered, and we will see what a court makes of them. You are making a mistake, Margaret said, and now the pleasantness was thinner, barely there. I am offering you a way out of this with something to show for it. If you push this to trial, I cannot promise what will come out. You mean the things Hargrove found that are unflattering to my father's memory, Eleanor said. Yes, Margaret said. Then let them come out, Eleanor said. My father has been dead for 3 years and he can't defend himself, and you're going to use whatever you've manufactured against him in front of a courtroom full of strangers. And I'm going to stand there and let you do it, and then Calloway is going to take it apart, and then Judge Hartley is going to tell that room what kind of man my father actually was. She looked at Margaret steadily. Do what you need to do. I'll do what I need to do. And we'll let the court decide. Silence. Margaret looked at her. For just a moment, a fraction of a moment, something crossed her face that Eleanor could not fully read. Not just anger. Something underneath the anger. Something that might, if the light were different, look almost like recognition. Then it was gone. I see, Margaret said. She turned and walked down the steps. Hargrove followed without looking at Eleanor. The wide-shouldered man followed Hargrove. Margaret paused at the bottom of the steps. She did not turn around. You have more of your father in you than I realized, she said. Eleanor said nothing. Margaret walked to her carriage and got in. The carriage moved down the drive. Eleanor stood in the doorway until it was out of sight. Then she became aware that Nathaniel was standing behind her in the hallway. She didn't know when he'd appeared, how long he'd been there. He'd heard all of it. Things you've manufactured, he said quietly. That was specific. Yes, she said. Do you know what she meant? No, Eleanor said. But I know Margaret. If she had something real, she'd have used it already. She's hoping I don't know that. She's hoping the threat of it is enough to make me back down. A silence. Was she right? Nathaniel said. About there being things that could damage your father's memory. Eleanor thought about her father. His desk always a little cluttered. The way he kept receipts for everything, every transaction, every agreement, every debt paid and owed. The way he'd been meticulous to the point of sometimes driving people around him slightly mad. My father, she said carefully, was not a perfect man. He made some decisions in his last years that I know he regretted. Business things. Things that didn't go the way he hoped. She paused. But he was an honest man. I know that. And honesty leaves a trail. You think his records are clean, Nathaniel said. I think if they weren't, Margaret would have used them against him before now, Eleanor said. She's been managing his estate for 3 years. If there was something damaging, she'd have found it. And she'd have used it to shore up her own position, not saved it for a court case. She turned around and looked at Nathaniel. She has nothing. She's hoping I don't know that. Nathaniel looked at her for a long moment. And there it was again, that recalibration, that quiet, rapid adjustment. Yes, he said. I think you're right. I know I'm right, Eleanor said. And she did. For the first time in a long time, she knew something with the clean, uncomplicated certainty of a woman who has stopped second-guessing herself long enough to hear her own thinking clearly. She was right. Margaret had nothing, and the land was going to come home. Thomas Wren arrived on a Thursday. Eleanor heard the horse first coming fast up the drive. The kind of speed that meant news, not courtesy. She was at the kitchen table with Calloway's papers spread in front of her when Mrs. Pruitt appeared in the doorway and said very calmly, "There's a man come from Ohio." And Eleanor was on her feet before the sentence finished. He was younger than she'd expected. Mid-30s, sun-darkened, with the look of a man who had been riding hard for several days and had not slept much in between. He stood in the front hall with his hat in his hands and looked at Eleanor with the expression of a man who understood exactly why he had been sent for. "Miss Whitmore," he said. "Mr. Wren," she said. "Thank you for coming." "Your man found me in Cincinnati," he said. Said it was urgent. "It is," she said. "Come in, sit down. Tell me what you remember." He sat. Mrs. Pruitt put coffee in front of him, without being asked, which was her way of indicating that she approved of someone, and Wren wrapped both hands around the cup and looked at Eleanor directly. "I witnessed those documents," he said. "June of 1813, your father's study. He was sitting at his desk, completely clear-headed, wrote out the terms himself, and asked me and James Aldridge to sign as witnesses. We did." He paused. "I didn't know there was going to be a dispute. If I'd known—" "You didn't know," Eleanor said. "You couldn't have. What matters is that you're here now." "Aldridge signed those papers," Wren said. "Same as me, with his own hand." "I know," Eleanor said. "He won't be testifying against them." Wren looked at her steadily. "He sent me a letter," he said, 2 weeks ago, telling me to stay in Ohio, that the situation was being handled and my presence would complicate things." Eleanor went very still. "He wrote to you," she said. "Yes, ma'am." "Do you have the letter?" Wren reached into his coat pocket and placed a folded letter on the table between them. Eleanor looked at it. She did not pick it up yet. "James Aldridge wrote to you," she said slowly, "and told you to stay in Ohio, 2 weeks ago, before Hargrove had even formally presented his case." "That's right," Wren said. "Which means Aldridge knew what Hargrove was planning," she said, "before it was officially filed. Which means Aldridge wasn't just a witness who was going to be called, he was part of the planning." She looked up. "He went to that dinner. He sat at Margaret's right hand. He already knew what was coming." The kitchen was very quiet. Wren looked uncomfortable. "I didn't know any of that when I got the letter," he said. "I just thought it was odd." "It's more than odd," Eleanor said. She picked up the letter and read it. It was 3 short paragraphs. Careful, precise, the language of a man who had written something he wanted to sound innocent while communicating something specific. "Matters are being handled. Your involvement is unnecessary. It would be better for everyone if you remained where you are. Better for everyone." She set the letter down. She looked at Wren. "You came anyway," she said. "I signed those papers," he said simply. "Your father was a clear-minded man on that day, and every day I knew him. I'm not going to let someone say otherwise and stay quiet about it." Something in Eleanor's chest settled, the particular kind of settling that happens when you have been holding yourself very tightly for a long time, and something solid appears beneath your feet. "Mr. Wren," she said, "I need you to tell that to a judge." "Yes, ma'am," he said. "That's why I rode from Cincinnati." She showed Nathaniel the letter that evening. He read it once, then he read it again. His expression did not change, but she had learned to read the things that happened below his expression, the set of his jaw, the particular quality of his stillness when he was working through something. "Aldridge was coordinating with Hargrove before the case was filed," he said. "Yes," Eleanor said. "Which means he wasn't just a witness they were going to call," he said. "He was part of building the case. He knew what documents existed. He helped design the argument around them." He looked up. "He was at that dinner." "He was at that dinner," Eleanor confirmed. Nathaniel was quiet for a moment. "I had a conversation with Aldridge about his financial situation," he said. "He agreed not to testify, but I didn't know he'd already been this deeply involved in constructing the case." He paused. "That changes things." "What kind of things?" Eleanor said. "It means there may be other people who were involved in the original planning," he said. "People we haven't accounted for." He set the letter down. Margaret didn't put this together alone. She's organized and she's intelligent, but this level of legal preparation, coordinating with a witness, before filing, timing the sale, targeting specific gaps in the clerk's records, that requires someone who knows how these things work. Hargrove, Eleanor said. Hargrove has been doing this for a long time, Nathaniel said. But Hargrove works for hire. Someone told him what to look for. Someone gave him the specific vulnerabilities to exploit. He looked at her. Who managed your father's legal affairs after he died? Eleanor thought. Margaret handled everything, she said. She brought in a man named Pierce, local lawyer. He's since retired. Pierce, Nathaniel said. He said the name and the way he said things he was filing away. Do you know where he is now? He moved to his son's property, Eleanor said. About 20 miles north. I'd like to speak with him, Nathaniel said. Why? Because if Pierce handed Hargrove the information he needed to build this case, he said, then there's a paper trail, legal correspondence, notes, billing records, things that document what Margaret knew and when she knew it. He paused. And if we can establish that Margaret was constructing this strategy before she had any legal reason to, before the documents were even formally disputed, then we're not just defending your claim, we're exposing premeditated fraud. Eleanor looked at him. Premeditated fraud, she said. Against a legal heir, he said, which is considerably more serious than a routine estate dispute. She was quiet for a moment. You're not just trying to win the land back, she said. No, he said. I'm trying to make sure this can never be done to you again. The distinction hit her harder than she expected. She had been thinking in terms of the land, the acreage, the court case, winning, getting back what was hers. She had been thinking about the battle directly in front of her. Nathaniel was thinking about what came after the battle. All right, she said. Go speak with Pierce. I'll go tomorrow morning, he said. Will you come? She looked at him. You want me there? I think Pierce will be more forthcoming with you present, he said. You're the one with the standing here. I'm just... He paused. I'm a man with resources. You're the one with the right. She nodded slowly. Then yes, she said. I'll come. Pierce was not what Eleanor expected. She had built a picture of him in her mind, a man complicit in what had been done to her, careful and deliberate and self-protecting. But the man who opened the door of his son's farmhouse was old in a way that went beyond years old, in the way of a man who had been carrying something heavy for too long. He looked at Eleanor, and something in his face changed, not guilt exactly, but the cousin of it. The look of a man who has been waiting for a reckoning and is almost relieved when it finally arrives. Miss Whitmore, he said. Mr. Pierce, she said. I think you know why I'm here. He stepped back and let them in. He sat down across from her in the small sitting room with his hands folded on his knees, and he looked at those hands, and then he looked up at her, and he said, I want you to know that I advised her against it. Eleanor waited. When she first came to me 6 months before your father died, she already knew about the documents. She'd found the receipt from Calloway's office in your father's papers. She came to me and asked me what could be done, and I told her there was nothing to be done. The documents were valid. They were filed correctly. The land was yours. He paused. She dismissed me shortly after that. And then she hired Hargrove, Eleanor said. Yes, he said. Did she contact you again? Eleanor said. After she hired Hargrove. He was quiet for a moment. She asked me to provide Hargrove with notes from my time managing your father's estate, he said. Background on his finances, his decisions, the periods of his illness. He stopped. I provided some of them. I told myself it was routine, that she had the right to request them. He looked up. I knew that wasn't the whole truth. Did the notes you provided include anything that could be used to argue my father's incapacity? Nathaniel said. It was the first thing he had said since they'd sat down, and the quietness of it made it land harder than if he'd spoken loudly. Pierce looked at Nathaniel. There was a period, he said slowly, in the summer of 1812 when your father was ill, before his final illness, an earlier episode. He was confused for several weeks. He recovered fully. I documented it at the time because I documented everything. He paused. I believe Hargrove intends to use that documentation to suggest the confusion was ongoing. When the documents were signed in June of 1813, Eleanor said, "My father was fully recovered." "Completely," Pierce said. "I can attest to that." "Then why did you give Hargrove the documentation from 1812? She said. Pierce was silent. "Mr. Pierce," she said. "Because Margaret told me she would make certain things known," he said. "About some arrangements I made in the final year of your father's estate. Things that were not strictly within the letter of my responsibilities." He looked at his hands again. "I was afraid." The room was very quiet. Eleanor looked at him for a long time. "She blackmailed you," she said. "Not an accusation, just a statement." "Yes," he said. "And you gave her what she needed." "Yes." His voice was barely above a whisper. "And now you're willing to tell the truth," she said. He looked up. "If it helps you," he said. "Yes, whatever you need." Eleanor turned to Nathaniel. He was watching her, not Pierce. He had been watching her throughout this conversation. She realized, not managing it, not directing it, watching her work. "Mr. Pierce," she said, "I need you to write down everything you just told me. Specifically, that you documented my father's 1812 illness as an isolated episode from which he fully recovered, that he was clear-headed and capable in June of 1813, and that you provided documentation to Hargrove under duress." She paused. "Can you do that?" "Yes," he said. "I'm not asking you to do anything that will harm you," she said. "I'm asking you to correct the record on my father. That's all." He nodded. His eyes were wet. He blinked, pressed his lips together, got control of himself. "He was a good man," Pierce said. "Your father. I should have done better by him." "Write it down," Eleanor said gently. "That's enough." 3 days later, Calloway filed a motion to expedite the hearing. The grounds were specific new evidence a witness newly arrived from Ohio documentation of a conflict of interest in Hargrove's case construction, and a sworn statement from the original managing attorney of the estate attesting to the deceased's capacity at the time of filing. Calloway presented the motion with the careful precision of a man who had been waiting a long time to do exactly this. Hargrove's response came within 24 hours. It was, even by Calloway's standards, aggressive. He appeared at Calloway's office in person, which Calloway told Eleanor afterward was not normal and was itself a signal. Hargrove was a man who communicated through letters and intermediaries. When he came in person, it meant something had shaken him. He sat across from Calloway with Eleanor present. She had insisted on being present, and he said very precisely that the motion was irregular, that the new witnesses had been improperly solicited, that Pierce's statement was the product of coercion, and that he would be filing his own motion to have the case dismissed on procedural grounds. Eleanor listened to all of this. Then she said, "Mr. Hargrove, I'd like to ask you something directly." Hargrove turned to look at her. He did so with the controlled patience of a man who was managing his surprise at being addressed. "Miss Whitmore," he said, "James Aldridge wrote to Thomas Wren 2 weeks before you filed your first motion," she said. "He told him to stay in Ohio. He told him his presence would complicate things." She paused. "How did Aldridge know what you were planning before you filed?" Hargrove looked at her. "I don't see how that's relevant," he said. "It's relevant," Eleanor said, "because it suggests that Mr. Aldridge was not simply a witness to be called, but an active participant in constructing the case. Which would mean your case was built in coordination with one of the document's original signatories. Which means the challenge to those documents is compromised at its foundation." She looked at him steadily. "Which, you know." A beat of silence. "You have no evidence of that," Hargrove said, but his voice was different now, just slightly, just enough. "I have the letter," Eleanor said. Another beat. "Where did you get—" He stopped. He had almost said something he didn't intend to say. He pulled it back with visible effort. "Whatever you believe you have," he said carefully, This matter will be decided by the court. Yes, Eleanor said. It will. She looked at him. Mr. Hargrove, I want to give you an opportunity to advise your client before the hearing. I want you to tell Margaret that I know what she built and how she built it and who helped her build it. And I want you to tell her that I am not going to accept a settlement, and I am not going to withdraw, and I am not going to be frightened into silence. She paused. And I want you to tell her that if she continues to pursue this, everything that comes out in that courtroom will be a matter of public record. Hargrove looked at her for a long moment. I'll convey your position, he said. Thank you, Eleanor said. He left. Calloway looked at her. That was either very effective or very risky, he said. It was both, Eleanor said. But she needs to know I'm not afraid of her. If she still believes I am, she'll find more angles. She'll keep manufacturing pressure. She paused. I need her to understand that the pressure isn't working. And does it, Calloway said, work on you? Eleanor thought about 7 years. About the coat on the rack that she'd had to leave behind. About 40 people who said nothing. No, she said, not anymore. The night before the hearing, Eleanor could not sleep. She lay in the plain room at Blackwood House and stared at the ceiling and went through everything. Wren's testimony, Hartley's testimony, Pierce's statement, the Aldridge letter, the documents themselves, clean and dated and signed her father's handwriting on the deed transfer, the particular slant of his letters that she knew as well as her own. She was ready. She knew she was ready. The case was as strong as it could be made, and she was still terrified. Not of losing the land. She was afraid of that, but that wasn't the specific terror that sat on her chest at 2 a.m. She was afraid of standing in front of a room full of people and being looked at, being judged, having the story of the last 7 years held up and examined and having strangers decide what it meant. She was afraid of being dismissed again, of making the case and having someone somewhere simply decide it didn't matter. She heard footsteps in the hall. Slow, deliberate. Then they stopped outside her door. A knock. Very quiet. Miss Whitmore? Nathaniel's voice. I saw the light. She had left the lamp burning. I'm awake, she said. A pause. May I? Yes, she said. He opened the door and stood in the doorway, not coming in, just standing there in the light from the hall, still dressed clearly, not having slept either. Can't sleep, he said. It wasn't a question. No, she said. He leaned against the door frame. They looked at each other in the low light, and Eleanor thought how strange it was, this arrangement, a man she hadn't known 2 months ago, whose house she was living in, whose resources had rebuilt her case from nothing, standing in her doorway at 2 a.m, like a piece of furniture that had always been there. Tell me something you haven't told me, she said. He was quiet for a moment. About the case. About anything, she said. He looked at the door frame. When your father came to me, he said slowly. The first time it was an evening in October, late in the year. He came to my office in the city without an appointment. My man tried to turn him away, and he didn't make a scene. He just stood there and said he'd wait, and something about the way he said it made my man come and tell me. He paused. I almost didn't see him. I was busy. I had 15 things that needed doing. But I went out, and there he was, this man I didn't know, standing in my outer office with his hat in his hands, and he looked at me and he said, I need you to remember something for me. Not help. Not fix. Just remember. He stopped. I don't think I've ever been asked for exactly that before. Eleanor was very still. He said, remember, she said. He said, my daughter is the rightful heir to my land, and I am afraid that by the time she needs that to be true, I will not be here to say it. And he looked at me. He looked at me the way you sometimes look at me, and he said, will you remember? Nathaniel paused. I said yes. And you did, Eleanor said. I did, he said. He was easy to remember. He was a man who meant exactly what he said. He was, she said. A silence, comfortable and not. You're going to win tomorrow, Nathaniel said. You don't know that, she said. I know the case, he said. I know what's in it. You've built something solid. Calloway is the best man for it. Hartley will be believed. Wren's testimony combined with Pierce's statement dismantles everything Hargrove had to work with. He looked at her steadily. You're going to win. And if I don't, she said, then we find another way, he said. There's always another way. I told you that. You believe that, she said. You actually believe it. I've found it to be true, he said. She looked at him. Has there ever been something you couldn't find another way around? She said. He was quiet for a moment, longer than usual. Once or twice, he said. Things that couldn't be fixed, people who couldn't be protected in the end no matter what I did. He paused. It's a different kind of loss. The kind where you did everything right and it wasn't enough. What did you do? She said. After. I kept going, he said simply. Because stopping doesn't help the next person. Eleanor looked at him in the doorway and thought about that, about a man who kept going, not because loss didn't affect him, but because he'd decided something larger than the loss mattered more. My father chose well, she said quietly. Something moved across Nathaniel's face. She watched it come and go. Go to sleep, Miss Whitmore, he said. You have a long day tomorrow. I know, she said. He pushed off the door frame. He was about to pull the door shut. Mr. Blackwood, she said. He stopped. Thank you, she said, for remembering. He held her gaze for a moment in the low light. Yes, ma'am, he said, and pulled the door shut. The hearing was in the county courthouse, a building Eleanor had walked past her entire life without ever thinking she would stand inside it arguing for what was hers. The room filled quickly. She had not expected the number of people who apparently had an interest in attending. Landowners, merchants, the wives from those careful dinner tables, people Eleanor recognized and people she didn't. The county was watching. Margaret was already seated when Eleanor arrived. She was dressed in deep gray, composed and upright, and she did not look at Eleanor when Eleanor came in. Hargrove sat beside her arranging papers with the efficiency of a man who had decided his best strategy was to appear untroubled. Calloway was at the table opposite. He looked up when Eleanor sat down beside him. Ready? He said. Yes, she said. The judge was a man named Forsyth, not Hartley, who was there as a witness, not a sitting judge. Forsyth was 60, measured with a reputation for thoroughness that Calloway had described as both an asset and a warning. He'll take his time. He'll be fair. Don't try to rush him, and don't try to manage him. Eleanor had no intention of doing either. The hearing opened. Calloway presented. Hargrove responded. And for the first hour, it was exactly as procedural and grinding as Eleanor had expected. Arguments about filing, about timing, about the clerk's records, and the nature of witness solicitation back and forth in the careful language of men who spent their lives translating conflict into paperwork. Then Hartley took the stand. He was 72 years old, and he sat in that chair like he had built it himself, and he looked at Judge Forsyth, and he said, I knew Richard Whitmore for 22 years. I knew him in health and in illness. I knew him in the last year of his life. And I will tell you plainly what I know to be true. The room was very quiet. In June of 1813, Hartley said Richard Whitmore was a man in full possession of his faculties. His earlier illness had passed. He was managing his property, making decisions corresponding with business partners, and caring for his daughter. He was the most organized and deliberate man I knew. Whatever he filed in June of 1813, he filed knowing exactly what he was doing and why. Hargrove cross-examined. He was smooth and careful, and he tried several angles, and Hartley deflected each one with the patience of a man who had been watching lawyers work for 50 years and was not intimidated by any of it. Then Thomas Wren. He sat in that chair and he said, I was there. I watched him sign those papers. He wrote the terms himself. He asked me to read them before I signed. He was clear. He was deliberate. He was the most clear-headed man in that room. Hargrove tried the angle of the 1812 illness. Wren looked at him and said, "That was 1812. I'm talking about June of 1813, 13 months later. He'd been well for over a year." Then Pierce's statement read into the record by Calloway, the documentation of the 1812 illness as a fully resolved episode, the attestation of complete recovery, and the quiet, devastating lines at the end, where Pierce described the pressure applied to provide materials to Hargrove and why. The room shifted when those lines were read. Eleanor felt it, a change in the air, a collective recalibration. Then Calloway placed the Aldridge letter on the record. He read the relevant portions. He noted the date 2 weeks before Hargrove's first filing. He noted the instructions to stay away. He noted the language better for everyone. "Mr. Hargrove," Judge Forsyth said, "can you explain how a listed witness came to communicate with another potential witness regarding this case before the case was formally filed?" Hargrove said something about the informal nature of legal preparation and the normal communication between parties. He said it very smoothly and very carefully, and it did not, Eleanor thought, land the way he'd intended it to. Forsyth looked at him for a moment. Then he wrote something down. He deliberated for 40 minutes. Eleanor sat at the table and did not move. Calloway sat beside her. On the other side of the room, Margaret sat very straight and very still, and Hargrove spoke quietly in her ear, and Margaret's expression told Eleanor nothing, because Margaret's expression never told Eleanor anything. When Forsyth came back, the room went so quiet Eleanor could hear the person behind her breathing. He spoke for 6 minutes. He went through each point methodically, the validity of the filing, the witness testimony, the documentation of Richard Whitmore's capacity, the concerns raised by the Aldridge letter, and Pierce's statement, the procedural questions around Hargrove's case construction. And then he said, "The court finds in favor of Eleanor Grace Whitmore. The northern acreage, as described in the documents filed by Richard James Whitmore in June of 1813, is hereby recognized as the legal property of Eleanor Grace Whitmore effective immediately. Any pending sale agreements affecting said property are void pending further review." He kept talking. Eleanor stopped hearing the words. The land was hers. She sat very still and let that be true for a moment. She had not moved, had not made a sound, but something in her face must have changed, because Calloway put a hand briefly on her arm and then removed it, and she was grateful for both the gesture and its brevity. She did not look at Margaret. Not yet. It was only when the room began to move around her, people standing, the low murmur of voices, Calloway gathering his papers with the contained satisfaction of a man who had done exactly what he came to do, that Eleanor turned. Margaret was still seated. Hargrove was speaking to her in a low voice, and Margaret was listening, and her expression was composed in the way it always was, the careful management of a face that had been managed for decades. But her hands, Eleanor noticed, were pressed flat on the table in front of her. Pressed flat. Hard. The way you pressed your hands against something when you were trying not to show that they were shaking. Eleanor looked at those hands for a moment. Then she stood up and she smoothed her dress and she walked out of the courtroom into the gray July light. Nathaniel was outside. He had not been in the room. He had removed himself deliberately because his presence would have been a complication, and they both knew it. He was standing at the edge of the courthouse steps with his hat in his hands, and he looked at her face when she came out, and he read it in a single second. "Done," he said. "Done," she said. He let out a long breath. And then he looked at her. Really looked the way he sometimes did, the way that was not the assessing, strategic look she'd come to recognize, but something different, something quieter, and he said, "Your father would be very proud." Eleanor pressed her lips together. She breathed. "I know," she said. And she did. For the first time in 3 years, she knew it without any shadow of doubt. She looked out at the road. The gray summer sky. The world going about its business. The land was hers. Her father's name was intact. The truth was on the record. And Margaret, sitting inside that courtroom with her hands pressed flat on a table, finally knew that Eleanor Whitmore was not going to be managed. Not now. Not ever again. The land was hers on paper. Getting it back in practice was something else entirely. Eleanor rode to Whitmore Estate the morning after the hearing with Calloway beside her and a copy of the court's ruling in her coat pocket. She had thought about this moment, had rehearsed it, had prepared herself for whatever version of Margaret might be waiting on the other side of that door. She had not prepared for no one answering the knock. She knocked twice, then a third time. The door stayed closed. She could hear movement inside, the specific quality of a house that contained people who were choosing not to respond, and she stood on the front steps of her father's house and knocked again. The door opened. Not Margaret. A young housemaid Eleanor didn't recognize, which meant she'd been hired in the last 2 years, who looked at Eleanor with the wide eyes of someone who had been given very specific instructions about this moment. "Mrs. Whitmore is not receiving visitors," the girl said. "I'm not a visitor," Eleanor said. "I'm the property owner. I have a court order. Please tell Mrs. Whitmore I'm here." The girl disappeared. The door stayed open, which Eleanor took as an invitation, and stepped inside. The hall was exactly as she remembered it. Her father's portrait still on the less prominent wall. The coat rack. The particular smell of the house beeswax and old wood, and something floral that Margaret had always insisted on, which Eleanor had always found slightly suffocating. She stood in the hall and waited. Margaret appeared at the top of the stairs. She was dressed composed, not a single element of her appearance suggesting that anything had gone wrong the day before. She looked at Eleanor the way she might look at something she had ordered, and found to be the wrong size a mild inconvenience that she was prepared to manage. "Eleanor," she said. "Mrs. Whitmore," Eleanor said, "I need to speak with you about the transfer of the northern acreage. Calloway has the paperwork. We'd like to make this as straightforward as possible." Margaret descended the stairs without any hurry. "I've spoken with Hargrove this morning," she said. "He believes there are grounds for appeal." Eleanor looked at her. "He may be right," she said. "He's welcome to file one. While he does, I'll be taking legal possession of the northern property and the tenant leases as the court ordered." "You can't simply walk onto that land," Margaret said. "The court order says I can," Eleanor said. "The appeal will challenge." "The appeal doesn't suspend the order," Calloway said from behind Eleanor. He said it pleasantly, in the way of a man stating a fact rather than making an argument. "The court's ruling is effective immediately. The pending appeal process doesn't change Miss Whitmore's immediate right to access and manage the property." Margaret looked at Calloway. Then she looked at Eleanor. "This is not finished," she said. "No," Eleanor agreed. "It isn't. But today I need the keys to the north gate and the tenant ledgers. Everything else can wait for the appeal process." A long silence. Margaret held Eleanor's gaze for what felt like a very long time. Eleanor did not look away. Then Margaret turned and said to the housemaid, who had reappeared at the edge of the hall, "Bring Miss Whitmore the north key." The girl went. Margaret looked at Eleanor. "You think you've won something," she said very quietly. "You think standing in this hall with a piece of paper makes you what your father wanted you to be." "No," Eleanor said. "I think standing in this hall with a piece of paper is a legal formality. What my father wanted me to be is something I've been working on for 2 months. The paper is just paperwork." Margaret looked at her for a long moment. "You've changed," she said. "Yes," Eleanor said. "I have." The housemaid returned with a key on an iron ring. Eleanor took it. She looked at it for a moment, the iron worn smooth in the places where hands had held it for years. Her father's hands, probably, before Margaret's. She put it in her pocket. "Thank you," she said to the girl. She turned to leave. "Eleanor." Margaret's voice from behind her. Something different in it, not the pleasantness, not the precision. Something raw, almost despite itself. Eleanor stopped. She did not turn around. "Your father loved you very much," Margaret said. "Whatever else he did love you." Eleanor stood in the doorway for a moment. "I know that," she said. "I never doubted it." She walked out. The north gate opened on land that had been waiting. That was how it felt. Not neglected exactly, not damaged, but held in suspension, like something that had been pausing its breath until the right person came back. Eleanor walked through the gate and onto the north path, and she felt the ground under her feet, the way she had felt it as a girl walking these same paths with her father, learning the names of things. The tenant farmers were in the fields when she arrived. Two families, the Kemps and the Reeds, who had been working this land for years. Both families had known her father. She had met them as a child and not seen them in years because Margaret had managed the tenant relationships herself and Eleanor had not been involved. She did not know if they would receive her. She did not know what Margaret had told them about the court case about Eleanor, about what was happening. She found out quickly. Old Joseph Kemp saw her coming from 50 yards away, and he stopped what he was doing, and he looked at her, and then he did something she had not expected. He took off his hat. She was close enough now to see his face clearly, and what was on it was not surprise or caution, or the careful neutral expression of a man who was waiting to see how things were going to go. It was something much simpler, relief. "Miss Whitmore," he said. "We heard the ruling yesterday. I didn't know if you'd come out here or not." "I came as soon as I could," she said. "We've been taking care of things," he said. "Best we could. There were some decisions that should have been made in the spring that weren't the East Field, the drainage situation. I've been keeping notes." He reached into his coat and produced a worn notebook. "Everything I thought you'd want to know." Eleanor took the notebook. She looked at it. "You've been keeping records," she said. "For who?" "For you," he said simply. "I figured eventually you'd come back, and you'd need to know what happened while you weren't here." Eleanor looked at the notebook in her hands. Looked at this man who had been farming her father's land his whole life and had kept records for her because he figured she'd come back. "Mr. Kemp," she said, "how long have you known my father's documents existed?" He was quiet for a moment. "About a year after he died," he said. "Thomas Wren told me before he left for Ohio, said he'd signed something for your father and that it meant the Northland was yours and that if I ever needed to testify to the state of the land, I should keep good records." He paused. "So I did. 3 people. Wren, Kemp, Pierce, all of them quietly, separately keeping pieces of the truth. Her father had built a network she hadn't known about. Not dramatic, not organized. Just a man who understood that if you needed something to be remembered, you asked multiple people because you never knew which one would be in the right place when it mattered." She pressed her hand over the cover of the notebook. "Thank you," she said, and she meant it in every possible direction. Chateau. She spent 3 days on the north property. Not in the house, she was not ready for that yet, was not sure when she would be. She slept at Blackwood House and came out each morning at sunrise and walked the fields and spoke with the Kemps and the Reeds and went through Kemp's records and her father's old ledgers and began to understand the full shape of what she had been given. It was more than she'd known. Not just the acreage she'd understood, had heard her father speak of, had numbers for, but the particulars. The East Fields drainage problem that Kemp had identified in his notes, which turned out to have a straightforward solution, her father had actually discussed before he died, and left written down somewhere she'd found on the second day. The agreement with the mill upstream that had lapsed under Margaret's management and could be renegotiated. The orchard that had been underproducing for 2 years because of a management decision Margaret had made, that the Reeds had disagreed with and documented their disagreement about quietly in their own records. Everything was there. The land had been waiting, and the people on the land had been paying attention, and between them and her father's notes and Kemp's notebook, Eleanor had a complete picture of what the northern acreage needed and how to give it to her. She sat up late on the 3rd night at Blackwood House, with all of it spread on the table in front of her, making her own notes, organizing the priorities, and she felt something she had not felt in a very long time. Competent. Not in a quiet, defensive way, not the way she had felt when she managed things at Whitmore Estate, carefully and invisibly in ways that Margaret could take credit for, but in a clear, direct way. The way it felt when you understood a problem fully and could see the shape of the solution. She heard footsteps and looked up. Nathaniel was in the doorway. "It's past midnight," he said. "I know," she said. He came in and looked at the table. He did not comment on the scope of what was spread across it, The ledgers, the notes, the drainage calculations, the orchard projections. He just looked at it, the way he looked at things he was assessing. "The East Field," he said, pointing at one of the pages. "Drainage issue," she said. "My father actually wrote up a proposed solution before he died. I found it in the ledger. It's straightforward. It'll take some work in the fall, but it's not complicated." "The mill agreement," he said, looking at another page. "Lapsed 2 years ago," she said. "I think we can renegotiate better terms than my father had originally. The mill's situation has changed. I looked into it." Nathaniel looked at her. "You looked into it," he said. "I asked Calloway to find out what he could about the mill's current ownership," she said. "The original owner sold it 18 months ago. The new owner is expanding. He needs reliable agreements more than the old owner did. We're in a stronger negotiating position than my father was." Nathaniel was quiet for a moment. Then he sat down across from her. "How long did it take you to work all of this out?" he said. 3 days, she said. He looked at the table again. "Your father told me you understood the land," he said. "I thought he meant emotionally, sentimentally." "He didn't," she said. "No," Nathaniel said. "He clearly did not." She looked at him. "You sound surprised." "Not surprised," he said. "Just—" He stopped, tried again. "You've been living in someone else's house for 7 years being told you were nothing, and in 3 days, you've produced a better analysis of a property situation than most managers would in 3 months." He paused. "I'm not surprised. I'm—" He stopped again, and then he just said, "I'm glad." Eleanor looked at him. "That's all," she said. "You're glad." "It seemed like enough," he said. She almost smiled. "It is," she said, a comfortable quiet. She turned back to her notes. He didn't leave. "There's something I need to tell you," he said after a moment. She looked up. "Hargrove filed the appeal this afternoon," he said. "I heard from Calloway an hour ago." "I expected that," she said. "There's more," he said. "Margaret has retained a second lawyer, a man from the city name of Weston, more senior than Hargrove, more experienced in this specific kind of estate litigation." Eleanor sat back. "She's escalating." "Yes," he said. "She lost the first round, and she's bringing in a larger weapon." He looked at her steadily. "The appeal process will take months. During that time, the court order stands, the land is legally yours. But Weston is known for finding procedural angles that other lawyers miss. Things that can delay and complicate even a clear ruling." "How do you know about Weston?" she said. "I've dealt with him before," Nathaniel said. "In a business matter 3 years ago. He's not dishonest, he operates within the law, but he's very good at making the law work slower than you want it to." "Can we counter him?" "Calloway can hold his own," Nathaniel said. "But I want to be honest with you. This next phase is going to be harder in a different way. The hearing was about the truth. The appeal will be about procedure, and procedural battles are slower and less satisfying, and they go on longer than anyone wants." Eleanor looked at her notes, at the drainage calculations, at the mill agreement, at all the work she had just laid out in front of her. "Then I'll be managing the land while the procedure grinds along," she said. "The appeal doesn't suspend the order. You said so yourself." "No, it doesn't," he said. "You're right. Then I'm going to put the Eastfield drainage in order," she said. "I'm going to renegotiate the mill agreement. I'm going to get the orchard back to where it should be, and while Hargrove and Weston are filing motions, I'm going to build something so solid on this land that no procedural argument can undo it." She looked at him. "They can appeal all they like. They're going to be appealing something that's already working." Nathaniel looked at her for a long moment. "Yes," he said, and something in the way he said it made it sound like more than agreement. She returned to her notes. He stayed a while longer, not speaking much, just present in the way he sometimes was, a quiet, stable weight in the room that she had. She realized come to rely on in a way she had not entirely expected, and was not entirely sure what to do with. The twist came on a Tuesday 3 weeks into the appeal process. It came not from Weston or Hargrove, but from a direction Eleanor had not been watching. She was at the north property when one of the Kemp boys came to find her out of breath from running with an expression on his face that told her before he spoke that something had gone wrong. "There's a man at the gate," he said. "Says he's got papers from the county about a lien." Eleanor went very still. "A lien," she said. "Yes, ma'am. He's waiting at the gate. He says it affects the north acreage." She walked to the gate. The man was a county official, officious and uncomfortable with a sealed document in his hands. He looked at Eleanor with the expression of a person who was performing an unpleasant duty and would very much prefer to be somewhere else. "Miss Whitmore," he said, "I've been asked to serve you with notice of a creditor's lien filed against the Whitmore North acreage, filed this morning." Eleanor took the document. She opened it. She read it. The lien was filed by a creditor claiming that Richard Whitmore had borrowed a sum of money in 1811 and had never repaid it. The creditor was claiming that the unpaid debt with interest accumulated over 5 years now constituted a claim against the estate, specifically against the north acreage, which the creditor claimed had been pledged as security for the loan. The creditor's name was Harlan Voss. Eleanor had never heard of Harlan Voss. She looked up at the county official. "Where was this filed?" she said. "County clerk's office this morning," he said. "I'm sorry, Miss Whitmore. I'm just serving the notice." She folded the document and put it in her pocket. "Thank you," she said. She went straight to Calloway. Calloway read the document twice. Then he set it on his desk and looked at Eleanor with an expression that was very controlled. "You don't know this name," he said. "I've never heard it," Eleanor said. "And your father never mentioned a loan of this size." "My father kept meticulous records," Eleanor said. "He documented every financial arrangement he ever made. I've been through his ledgers. There is no loan from Harlan Voss. There is no mention of this name anywhere." "Then this is either a debt your father kept no record of," Calloway said, "which based on what I know of him is essentially impossible, or it's manufactured," Eleanor said. "Yes," Calloway said. "Weston," she said. Calloway nodded slowly. "This has the structure of something Weston would put together. A creditor's lien is a different legal mechanism than an estate dispute. It bypasses the appeal process. It's filed against the property directly, not against your claim to it." He paused. "If this lien is found valid, it creates a claim on the property that exists regardless of who owns it. Meaning even if I win the appeal, the lien could still extract value from the land," Eleanor said. "Or make it effectively ungovernable while the lien is contested," Calloway said. "Which is possibly the goal, not to win, but to make the land so legally complicated that it becomes worthless to you while the battles grind on." Eleanor sat very still. "Who is Harlan Voss?" she said. "I don't know," Calloway said. "But I'm going to find out." "Find out fast," Eleanor said. "Because if this is manufactured, there's a paper trail. There's always a paper trail." She looked at him. "My father would have had a receipt, a contract, a letter acknowledging the loan, something. If Voss is claiming this was a legitimate arrangement, he needs documentation." "He filed documentation with the lien," Calloway said. He pointed to an attached page. "A promissory note signed with your father's name." Eleanor picked up the page. She looked at her father's signature. She had seen her father's signature thousands of times. On letters, on ledgers, on legal documents, on birthday cards, when she was a girl. She knew the particular slant of his letters, the way he crossed his T's slightly high, the way he always made the final E in Whitmore with a small distinctive lift. She looked at the signature on the promissory note. "This isn't his signature," she said. Calloway looked at her. "You're certain?" he said. "I'm completely certain," she said. She pointed. "My father crossed his T's high, always, since I was a child. He had a habit I used to tease him about it. He said his first teacher rapped his knuckles if he crossed them low, and he never got over it." She pointed at the note. "Look at that T. It's crossed exactly in the middle, exactly where my father never crossed his T's. Calloway picked up the document and looked at it very closely. He was quiet for a moment. "Eleanor," he said, and it was the first time he had ever used her given name. "If you're right about this, we're not dealing with a procedural obstruction. We're dealing with forgery." "I know," she said. "That's a criminal matter," he said. "I know that too," she said. He looked at her. "You want to pursue it. I want to expose it," she said. "There's a difference. I don't particularly want anyone put in jail. I want this stopped. I want it on the record that this was done. I want the people in this county who watched me walk out of my father's house with no coat to understand exactly what kind of woman Margaret Whitmore is." She paused. "And I want my father's name protected. If someone forged his signature, I am not going to let that stand unchallenged." Calloway sat back. He looked at her the way Hartley had looked at her, the way Kemp had looked at her, with a recognition that had nothing to do with her personally and everything to do with what she carried. "Nathaniel Blackwood," he said. "He needs to know about this today." "I'm going to him now," Eleanor said. She found Nathaniel in the stable, which was unusual. He generally left the horses to his men, but he was there when she arrived, brushing down the dark horse himself, with the particular absorbed quality of a man who needed something to do with his hands while he thought. He looked up when she came in. He saw her face. He set down the brush. She handed him the document without speaking. He read it. He read it slowly, which told her he was reading every word, not just the surface of it. When he finished, he looked up. "Voss," he said. "You know the name," she said. It was not a question. "I know it," he said carefully. "Harlan Voss is a man who does business in the city. He's not a lender by trade. He's a buyer. He acquires distressed properties." "Properties made distressed by liens that are filed against them," Eleanor said. "Sometimes," Nathaniel said. "He operates at the edge of what's legal. I've seen his name come up in situations before that had the same structure as this." "And the signature," Eleanor said. "Look at the T." He looked at the promissory note. He studied it. He set it down. "Your father's T's," he said. "Always crossed high," Eleanor said. "Whoever forged that signature didn't know that, which means it wasn't Margaret," Nathaniel said slowly. "Margaret lived with your father for years. She would have known." Eleanor hadn't thought of that. She looked at him. "Then who—" "Someone who had access to examples of your father's signature, but not enough time with him to know his habits," Nathaniel said. "Someone who was given the job by someone who needed it done and didn't want to do it personally." He paused. "Weston." "He hired a forger," Eleanor said. "Or used someone already in his employ," Nathaniel said. "And that person made an error." He looked at her. "A very specific, very identifiable error." "We need a handwriting expert," Eleanor said. "I know two," Nathaniel said. "In the city. Both of them have testified in court before. Both of them will stand behind their analysis." He was already moving, already thinking ahead the way he did when a problem had a solution and the solution required action. "I'll send for both today." "And Voss," she said. Nathaniel's expression shifted. "Leave Voss to me," he said. "No," Eleanor said immediately. He looked at her. "No," she said again more evenly. "I told you, tell me when you find things out. Don't act on them and tell me after. If you're going to speak with Voss, I want to know what you're going to say before you say it." A pause. "Eleanor, you said you'd tell me," she said, "when it was still relevant. This is still relevant." He held her gaze, and then he nodded. "I was going to tell him that we have identified the forgery," he said. "That we have identified the error in the signature. That we have two handwriting experts who will testify to it in court. And that his participation in a fraud of this nature against a documented legal heir constitutes criminal exposure that I suspect he is not adequately prepared for." He paused. "And I was going to give him the opportunity to withdraw the lien and disappear from this situation before it became considerably worse for him. And if he refuses, she said. Then we take it to a court and make it public, Nathaniel said. And Voss's involvement in this scheme becomes part of the public record, along with everything that connects him to Weston and through Weston to Margaret. Eleanor thought about that. She overplayed, Eleanor said quietly. Margaret overplayed. She was trying to make the land legally complicated enough to exhaust me. But she made a mistake. She brought in too many people, Nathaniel said. Weston Voss, whoever forged the document. Every person you bring in is another potential error, another thread that can be pulled. My father used to say that, Eleanor said. He said the most dangerous thing a dishonest person could do was involve other dishonest people, because dishonest people make mistakes. He was right, Nathaniel said. She looked at him. All right, she said. Speak with Voss, but I want to know what he says. The same day. Yes, he said. The same day. She turned to go. Eleanor, he said. She stopped. You identified the forgery, he said. From a single T. From a habit you noticed as a child. He paused. I want you to understand that this case, everything that's turned in your favor, has turned because of you. Not because of Calloway. Not because of me. Because of what you know and what you pay attention to and what you refuse to let go of. She stood with her back to him for a moment. My father taught me to read carefully, she said. He said the truth is usually in the details that people think you won't notice. He was right about that too, Nathaniel said. She turned around. He was looking at her with that quiet, particular expression, the one that wasn't the strategic assessment and wasn't the careful management, and was something she still didn't have a clean word for. I notice things, she said. That's all. No, he said. That's not all. But we can talk about the rest of it when this is finished. She looked at him for a moment. When this is finished, she said. Yes, he said. When this is finished. She held his gaze a beat longer than was strictly necessary. Then she walked out into the gray summer afternoon with her father's forged signature in her pocket and the North Gate key on her hip. And she thought about what came after. Not just winning, not just recovering the land, but what happened in the space that opened up when the fighting was done, and something had to grow there instead. She thought she might know what she wanted to put in that space. She was not quite ready to say it out loud, but she thought she knew. Harlan Voss withdrew the lien on a Friday morning. No explanation, no formal statement. Just a filing at the county clerk's office, 2 sentences signed, withdrawing the creditor's claim against the Whitmore North acreage. By the time Eleanor heard about it, it had already been processed and recorded, as though Voss had wanted the whole thing to disappear as quietly and quickly as possible. She was at the North property when Nathaniel rode out to tell her. She was standing in the east field with Kemp going over the drainage work, and she saw Nathaniel coming and knew from the way he was riding that it was news, and knew from the way he pulled up that it was good news. Voss withdrew, he said. She took that in. What did he say? Very little, Nathaniel said. He understood the situation once it was explained clearly. She looked at him. The handwriting experts, among other things, he said. What other things? He looked at her steadily. I told you I'd tell you what he said. I didn't say I'd tell you everything I said to him. Nathaniel. It was the first time she had used his given name. They both noticed it. He held her gaze for a moment. I told him that 2 expert witnesses were prepared to testify that the promissory note was forged, he said. I told him that once that testimony became part of the public record, his association with the document would be investigated. And I told him that I had some knowledge of his other business arrangements that would not survive that level of scrutiny. He paused. He is a man who operates in gray areas, Eleanor. I simply made the gray area very uncomfortable. And Weston, she said. Weston has quietly communicated to Calloway that he is reconsidering his involvement in the appeal, Nathaniel said. He has not withdrawn yet, but he's reconsidering. Because Voss withdrew, she said. Because when Voss withdrew, whatever chain connected Voss to Weston to Margaret became a liability instead of an asset. Yes, Nathaniel said. Weston is careful. He won't stay in a case where the forgery has been identified and the person who executed it has already cut his losses. Kemp was standing a respectful distance away, looking at the drainage calculations in his notebook. Eleanor glanced at him, then back at Nathaniel. Margaret is losing her lawyers, she said. One by one, he said. She'll know why, Eleanor said. She'll know the forgery was identified. She'll know Voss ran. She paused. She's going to be frightened. Yes, Nathaniel said. Good, Eleanor said, and the word came out harder than she expected, and she did not take it back. She looked at the east field, at the drainage work that Kemp and his son had started the week before, following her father's notes, following the solution he had written down, and never had the chance to implement. The ground was responding. She could already see it, the way the water was moving differently, the way the soil was settling into the pattern it was supposed to have. Her father had known how to fix this. He had written it down, and now she was doing it. She turned back to Nathaniel. When do you think Weston makes it official? She said. End of the week, he said. Maybe sooner. And after Weston withdraws, the appeal weakens considerably, she said. Considerably, he agreed. Hargrove can continue with it, but without Weston's strategy, and without the lien as a parallel pressure point, the appeal has very little to stand on. The original ruling is solid. Calloway built it well. So we wait, she said. We wait, he confirmed. She looked at him for a moment. He was still on the horse looking down at her in the field, and the gray summer light was doing its thing, and she thought about what he'd said the other night. We can talk about the rest of it when this is finished. It's almost finished, she said. He met her eyes. Almost, he said. Weston withdrew on Wednesday. Hargrove filed a formal notice of intent to continue the appeal without co-counsel, which Calloway described to Eleanor as the legal equivalent of a man announcing he was going to climb a mountain with no equipment. Technically possible, not likely to succeed. The appeal process would continue. That was the nature of it. Appeals moved through the system on their own schedule, regardless of what happened to the lawyers involved, but the specific arguments Weston had been constructing were now unsupported. Hargrove was a capable lawyer, but he was not Weston, and the case he'd built had been designed around Weston's strengths. 3 days after Weston withdrew, Eleanor received a letter. It was delivered in the morning while she was at the kitchen table at Blackwood House, with her father's ledgers spread in front of her. Mrs. Pruitt brought it in without comment and set it beside her coffee cup, and disappeared, which was her way of indicating that she knew what it was. The handwriting on the envelope was Margaret's. Eleanor looked at it for a long moment. Then she opened it. It was 3 pages written in Margaret's precise, controlled hand. Eleanor read it slowly. The first page was what she expected: formal language, a statement that Margaret was prepared to withdraw support for the appeal in exchange for a written agreement that Eleanor would not pursue the forgery matter further. An offer of mutual release, a clean line drawn under everything. The second page was less expected. Margaret wrote about Eleanor's father. Not strategically, or not only strategically. She wrote about the early years of the marriage, before Eleanor's mother died, before the estate became a battlefield. She wrote about what she had thought the marriage would be, and what it had turned into. She wrote about years of feeling like an outsider in her own home, of being managed and handled, and never quite trusted with the full truth of what Richard Whitmore was planning. Eleanor read those pages twice. She did not feel sympathy exactly, but she felt something more complicated than she had expected to feel, the recognition that Margaret's cruelty had roots, the way most cruelty did, in something that had been done to her first. That did not make it right. It did not change what Margaret had done. But it made it human, which was somehow harder to carry than if it had just been malice. The third page was the hardest. I knew about the documents before your father died, Margaret had written. Not because I found them by accident, because he told me. He sat me down in his study 3 months before he died, and he told me that he had arranged for Eleanor to receive the North property, and he asked me to honor it. He told me that he trusted me to do the right thing by his daughter. I did not do the right thing. I told myself reasons. There were always reasons. But the truth is simpler, and worse than any reason I gave myself, I was afraid. Afraid that without that land, my position meant nothing. Afraid that you would take everything once you had legal standing. Afraid of being as powerless as I had always felt in that house. I want you to know that I understood when the court ruled against me that your father had been right about you. He was always right about you. That is something I should have told you years ago and did not. Eleanor set the letter down on the table. She sat with it for a long time. Mrs. Pruitt appeared in the doorway, read Eleanor's face, and disappeared again without a word. When Nathaniel came in from the morning's work, Eleanor was still at the table. She handed him the letter without speaking. He sat down and read it. He read all 3 pages. When he finished, he set it down and looked at her. "What do you want to do?" he said. "I don't know yet," she said honestly. "You don't have to decide today," he said. "No," she said, "but I will have to decide." She looked at the letter. "She's asking me not to pursue the forgery. Legally, I probably should. It's fraud. Hargrove and Weston's involvement, Voss, all of it is a matter the court could address." "Yes," he said, "but if I pursue it, it drags on for another year," she said. "Maybe more. And at the end of it, what do I have that I don't already have? The land is mine. The appeal is going to fail. The forgery has already been exposed in practice. Voss ran, Weston ran. The record shows what it shows." She paused. "What does another year of fighting get me that I don't already have?" "Justice," Nathaniel said. "In the formal sense. I already have justice," she said. "The court ruled. My father's name is protected. The land is working again." She looked at him. "What I'd be pursuing is punishment, and I'm not sure that's the same thing." Nathaniel was quiet for a moment. "Some people would say they're the same thing," he said. "Some people?" Eleanor agreed. "Are you one of them?" He thought about it. "No," he said. "I think punishment serves a purpose when it prevents future harm. When it doesn't serve that purpose, it's just consuming, for the person pursuing it." He looked at her. "But I also think you have every right to pursue it. What was done to you was serious." "I know it was," she said. "And I know my father would probably tell me to pursue every legal avenue available." She paused. "He'd also tell me not to spend my life fighting battles that are already won." She picked up the letter and read the 3rd page again. "He told me that he trusted me to do the right thing by his daughter. I did not do the right thing. She knows," Eleanor said quietly. I didn't expect her to know, or to say it." She set the letter down. "I thought she'd never admit it." "People surprise you," Nathaniel said. "Sometimes." "Yes," Eleanor said. "Sometimes." She sat for another moment. Then she made up her mind with the clean, decisive motion of someone who had been considering a question long enough and was ready to move. "I'll write to Calloway today," she said. "I'll tell him I'm willing to accept a mutual release in exchange for Margaret's withdrawal of the appeal. No criminal pursuit of the forgery, not because it doesn't deserve to be pursued, but because I'm choosing to close this rather than extend it." She paused. "But I want one thing in writing as part of the agreement." "What?" Nathaniel said. "An acknowledgement," Eleanor said, "from Margaret, in writing filed with the agreement, that she was fully aware of my father's intentions regarding the North property, that she acted contrary to those intentions, and that the property rightfully belongs to me." She looked at him. "Not for the court, not for the legal record, for my father. So that it's written down somewhere officially that he told the truth, and she knew it." Nathaniel held her gaze. "She may not agree to that," he said. "Then we don't have a deal," Eleanor said, "and we proceed with everything." He looked at her for a long moment. "I'll make sure Calloway frames it correctly," he said, "so there's no ambiguity about what she's signing." "Good," she said. She picked up her coffee. It was cold. She drank it anyway. "There's something else I want to talk to you about," she said without looking at him. "All right," he said. "The mill agreement," she said. "I spoke with the new owner last week. He's interested in renegotiating. The terms I have in mind are better than what my father had, significantly better. Better access to the river output, better pricing, a long-term commitment that protects both sides." She paused. "But I need a co-signatory on the business side. Someone the mill owner will take seriously. Someone who has standing in the commercial community of this region." She looked up. Nathaniel was looking at her with an expression she hadn't seen before. Something that was working very hard to be neutral and wasn't quite succeeding. "You're asking me to go into business with you," he said. "I'm asking you to co-sign a mill agreement," she said, "which is a very specific and limited business arrangement." "Eleanor," he said. "It makes practical sense," she said. "You have the commercial reputation. I have the property and the terms. Together we present a stronger case to the mill owner than either of us does separately." "That's true," he said. "And you've already established that you have an interest in the outcome of things involving this land," she said. "Also true," he said. "So this is a logical extension of an existing situation," she said. He looked at her steadily. "Is that what it is?" he said. Not a question. She held his gaze. "That's one way to describe it," she said. "What's another way?" he said. She was quiet for a moment. "I'm 24 years old," she said. "I've spent 7 years being managed and diminished and told I was nothing. I've spent the last 2 months rebuilding everything from the ground up. And in all of that," she stopped, started again. "In all of that, the one thing that has been consistent, the one thing I've been able to count on absolutely is you. And I don't know exactly what to do with that yet, but I know I don't want it to end when the legal situation resolves." The kitchen was very quiet. Nathaniel looked at her for a long moment. "Neither do I," he said. Simple, direct. The way he said everything that mattered most. She breathed. "All right," she said. "Then we'll figure out the rest of it." "Yes," he said. "We will." She turned back to the ledgers. He stayed at the table, and neither of them said anything else, because neither of them needed to. Margaret signed the acknowledgement on a Thursday afternoon 12 days later. Calloway had framed it exactly as Eleanor had asked, precise, unambiguous, filed as part of the mutual release agreement. Margaret had taken 4 days to respond after receiving the draft, and Eleanor had spent those 4 days not thinking about it deliberately, because she had learned that thinking too hard about things you couldn't control was a way of making yourself smaller. When the signed document arrived, Calloway called Eleanor to his office. She read it there, standing at his desk with the afternoon light coming through the window, and Calloway quietly pretending to be very interested in something on the other side of the room. Margaret had signed it, every line, including the acknowledgement, the formal written filed acknowledgement that Richard James Whitmore had communicated his intentions regarding the North property to his wife, that she had understood those intentions, and that the property had always rightfully belonged to his daughter, Eleanor Grace Whitmore. Her father's name, his intentions, written down. Official. True. Eleanor stood with the document in her hands for a long time. Then she set it down on Calloway's desk very carefully and said, "Thank you. For everything." Calloway looked at her. "It was a good case," he said. "It was your case." "It was my father's case," she said. "He built it. He just needed someone to finish it." "You finished it," Calloway said. "He'd know that." She nodded. She picked up her coat. She was almost at the door when he said, "Miss Whitmore." She turned. "The acknowledgement," he said. "It's part of the public record now. Anyone who looks at the matter today or 20 years from now will see it. Your father's name is clean." She looked at him. "Yes," she said. "I know." She walked out into the afternoon. The appeal was formally withdrawn by Hargrove the following Monday. No fanfare. No final dramatic argument. Just a filing 2 sentences, the same bureaucratic quietness with which all things in the legal world ended when one side stopped fighting. Calloway sent a note to Eleanor at the North property. She read it, folded it, put it in her pocket, and went back to the conversation she'd been having with Reed about the orchard. The orchard was the thing she cared about most, she'd decided. Not strategically, the east field was more economically significant. The mill agreement was more commercially valuable. But the orchard was the thing her father had loved, the way he loved few other things on the property. He had planted half of it himself when he was young before Eleanor was born. He had walked her through it every season and taught her the names of each variety and explained what each tree needed and why. Getting the orchard back to health felt more than anything else she had done in the past 3 months, like something done for him specifically. Reed was a practical man who didn't talk more than the situation required, which Eleanor appreciated, and he walked her through the changes he'd been implementing since she'd identified the management error, and she listened carefully and asked the right questions. And they stood in the orchard together in the gray summer afternoon and talked about trees, and it was, she thought, standing there, the most ordinary and most extraordinary conversation she had had in years. Ordinary because it was exactly what this land needed. Exactly what she understood, exactly what she was built for. Extraordinary because she was finally in a position to have it. She heard a horse on the road and turned. Nathaniel. He had not sent a note ahead, he rarely did. She'd learned. He appeared when he had something to say, or something to do, and his arrival had become over the past weeks as natural as the sound of the house settling at night, as unremarkable, and as reliable. He pulled up at the gate, looked at her across the orchard. "Hargrove withdrew," he said. "I know," she said. "Calloway sent a note." He looked at her, then at the orchard, then back at her. "How do you feel?" he said. She thought about it seriously, the way she thought about everything. "Like I can breathe," she said. "Like I've been holding my breath since July, and I'm just now remembering how." He nodded slowly. "That sounds right," he said. "Come in," she said. "Reed was just telling me about the Gravensteins. They're going to be productive again next season, all 3 of them." He dismounted and came through the gate, and Reed nodded to him with the easy acknowledgement of a man who had seen Nathaniel Blackwood on this property enough times to treat him as a known quantity. Nathaniel listened while Reed finished explaining the orchard situation, asked 2 questions that were exactly the right questions, and then Reed excused himself and went back to work and left Eleanor and Nathaniel standing in the orchard alone. "The Gravensteins were my father's favorite," Eleanor said. "He used to eat them straight off the tree in August. He'd bring a salt shaker out here, which my mother used to think was absurd." "What did you think?" Nathaniel said. "I thought it was wonderful," she said. "I used to follow him and steal the ones he'd already salted." Something moved across Nathaniel's face. The thing that was not quite a smile, but was close to it. "Did he mind?" "He pretended to," she said. "He was a very good pretender when he wanted to be." She looked at the trees. "I think next August these will be ready. The Gravensteins. I think they'll produce properly for the first time in 3 years." "I'll look forward to seeing that," Nathaniel said. She turned to look at him. "Will you?" she said. "Yes," he said. "I will." She held his gaze. "You said we'd talk about the rest of it when this was finished," she said. "I did," he said. "It's finished," she said. He was quiet for a moment. The orchard was very still. Somewhere in the trees a bird moved and settled. "Eleanor," he said. "Yes," she said. "I've been watching you for the better part of a year," he said. "At first because your father asked me to, and then because I couldn't not." He paused. "I've spent my adult life around capable people, people with power, with intelligence, with resources, and I have never not once watched someone start with nothing and build everything back with the specific combination of clarity and stubbornness and decency that you have." He stopped, looked at the trees. "Your father told me you were the most capable person he knew. I thought he was exaggerating the way fathers do. He was not exaggerating." Eleanor looked at him. "That's a very thorough compliment," she said. "I'm getting to the point," he said. "I know," she said. "I'm letting you get there." He turned to look at her directly. "I'd like to court you properly," he said, "if you're willing, with whatever that means given all of this." He gestured slightly, Meaning the orchard, the property, the past 3 months, all of it. I'm not asking you for anything right now. I'm asking if I can ask when the time is right. Eleanor looked at him for a long moment. You helped me fight for my father's land, she said. You drove me to a lawyer's office at sunrise. You sat in the corner of rooms and let me run my own case. You told me things when I asked and told me when you'd made a mistake. She paused. You stood in my doorway at 2 a.m. and told me about a man with a hat in his hands who said, "Remember something for me?" And you said yes. He held her gaze. Yes, she said. You can ask, he breathed. And the thing that crossed his face then was not the recalibration, and not the strategic assessment, and not the almost smile. It was just relief. Plain, uncomplicated human relief. Thank you, he said. Don't thank me yet, she said. You haven't asked. I know, he said. I want to do it right. She almost smiled. You usually do, she said. That's one of the more irritating things about you. Is it? He said. It makes it very hard to stay properly angry at you, she said. I'll try to be less competent, he said. Please don't, she said. He looked at her for another moment, and then he laughed, a real laugh surprised out of him, warm and genuine, and she realized she had never heard him laugh before, not really, and it was completely different from his almost smile, and she stored it away in the same place she stored things she wanted to keep. That evening, Eleanor went back to Whitmore Estate. Not for any legal reason. Everything legal had been handled. Not with Calloway or Nathaniel or any buffer or protection. Just herself on her own horse in the early evening. She knocked on the door. The young housemaid answered again. She looked at Eleanor with an expression that had shifted from the fearful propriety of the first visit she'd been watching events unfold. Eleanor supposed, as all household staff watched events unfold, with a clear eye and a longer memory than their employers generally credited them with. Is Mrs. Whitmore available? Eleanor said. The girl hesitated. She's in the sitting room, she said. Thank you, Eleanor said. I know the way. She walked through the hall, past her father's portrait still on the less prominent wall. She stopped in front of it. She looked at her father's face, the broad shoulders, the rough-looking hands. Even in the formal portrait, the particular expression the painter had caught, which was not the formal dignity the portrait was supposed to convey, but something more specific. A man who was thinking about something he considered more interesting than being painted. She touched the frame, just briefly. You were right, she told him silently. About all of it. I'm sorry it took this long. She went on to the sitting room. Margaret was in the chair by the window, and she looked smaller than Eleanor expected. Not physically, Margaret had never been a small woman, but in some other dimension, some measure of how much space a person occupied in a room. She had always filled rooms, Margaret had. Controlled them. And now she sat in the chair by the window of the house she had managed for 17 years, and she looked like a woman who had set down something very heavy and was not yet sure what to do without the weight of it. She looked up when Eleanor came in. She said nothing. Eleanor sat down across from her. She did not begin with pleasantries. She thought about what she wanted to say, and then she said it plainly. I read your letter, she said. Margaret held her gaze. I expected you would, she said. The part about my father, Eleanor said. About him sitting you down and telling you his intentions and asking you to honor them. She paused. That took something to write. Yes, Margaret said. It did. Why did you write it? Eleanor said. You didn't have to. The mutual release didn't require it. Margaret was quiet for a moment. Because it was true, she said. And because I'm 61 years old, and I'm tired of carrying true things that I've been pretending aren't true. She looked at Eleanor. And because you look like him. And sitting across from you and lying about who he was, I found I couldn't do it anymore. Eleanor sat with that. He loved you, Eleanor said. My father. Even after everything, I believe he loved you. Something crossed Margaret's face. I know he did, she said very quietly. That was also part of why it was hard. It would have been simpler if he hadn't. Yes, Eleanor said. I imagine it would. A silence. Not comfortable, but not hostile either. The particular silence of two people who have hurt each other and both know it and are sitting in the same room with that knowledge. What happens now? Margaret said. That depends on you, Eleanor said. You may remain in the main house for the time being, that's your arrangement, and I'm not here to disrupt it. The north property is mine, and I'll manage it. The rest of the estate is yours to occupy, as you have been. She paused. But I want you to understand something. Margaret looked at her. I'm not doing this because I've forgiven everything, Eleanor said. I'm doing it because I'm choosing to move forward rather than backward. There's a difference. I want to be clear about which one it is. I understand the difference, Margaret said. Good, Eleanor said. She stood up. She looked at Margaret for a moment, this woman who had been her stepmother for 17 years, who had taken 7 years from her, who had written 3 pages of truth in the end, when it might have been easier not to. Who had been afraid, and had acted from that fear, and had built something terrible with it. Who was also, in the end, just a person, with reasons even if the reasons didn't justify what she'd done. Margaret, Eleanor said, and it was the first time in years she had used her given name. My father asked you to do the right thing by his daughter. You didn't do it then, but you did it in that letter. She paused. That matters. Not enough to undo everything, but it matters. Margaret looked at her. Something in her face shifted, not dramatically, not with great visible emotion, but something real moved beneath the surface. Thank you, she said, for telling me that. Eleanor nodded. She walked out of the sitting room and through the hall and past her father's portrait and out the front door of Whitmore Estate. She stood on the front steps. The same steps she had stood on 2 months ago in the July evening, with no coat and no plan and nowhere to go. The gray summer sky, the same strange flat color it had been all season. The oak trees her father had planted along the drive, standing exactly where they had always stood. She breathed. She went home. The Winter Ball. The largest social event of the county's autumn season had been a Whitmore family tradition for 30 years. Eleanor's grandfather had started it. Her father had continued it. Margaret had run it for the last decade, organizing it with the precision she applied to everything, managing the guest list with the strategic eye of a woman who understood that social events were also power events. This year the invitations went out under Eleanor's name. She had not planned it as a statement. She had planned it as a practical decision. She was the property owner. The event was traditionally hosted by the Whitmore family. It made organizational sense for her to manage it. But she was aware, writing out the invitations with the same pen she'd been using for the ledgers, that it was also something else. That it would be understood as something else by everyone who received one. Mrs. Pruitt, who had come to the North property 3 days a week to help Eleanor establish the household there, looked at the stack of invitations and said without inflection, "Full guest list." "Full guest list," Eleanor confirmed. "Including the people from the July dinner," Mrs. Pruitt said. "Including those people," Eleanor said. Mrs. Pruitt picked up the stack. "Good," she said, which was the most emphatic Eleanor had ever heard her be about anything. Nathaniel received his invitation through the regular post along with everyone else. He appeared at the North property the next morning. "The Winter Ball," he said. "Yes," she said. "You're hosting it." "Yes," she said. He looked at her. "You understand what that means," he said. "Every person in this county who was at that July dinner, and everyone who heard about it afterward, and everyone who has been watching the situation unfold for 3 months, they'll all be there." "I know," she said. "And you'll be the host," he said. "Yes," she said. "Not the woman who helps with the household," he said. "Not the woman who was shown the door. The host." "Yes," she said. He was quiet for a moment. "Will you need anything?" he said. "Yes," she said. "I need you to come as my guest. Not as a neighbor, not as a business associate, as my guest." He held her gaze. "You're certain that's what you want?" "I've been certain about very few things in my life," she said. "I'm certain about this." "Then I'll be there," he said. Son, the evening of the winter ball came with the first real cold of the season. November sharp. Finally, a proper temperature for the time of year. The strange gray summer finally releasing its grip on the land, and letting autumn be what it was supposed to be. Eleanor dressed carefully, not in anything Margaret would have approved of, which had always erred toward invisible, toward appropriate, toward not calling attention. She dressed in deep blue, her mother's color a choice she had made deliberately, and with full understanding of what it meant to herself. She wore her hair the way she wanted to wear it. She put on the brooch her father had given her on her 18th birthday, which she had not worn in 7 years, because Margaret had once made a comment about it being unsuitable for a young woman's daily wear, and Eleanor had put it away, and she had not understood until now how much the act of putting it away had cost her. She put it on. She looked at herself. She thought, "There you are." The guests arrived for an hour before Nathaniel came. Eleanor moved through the rooms of her family's house, the main house where the ball was traditionally held, where she had not been an invited guest in years, but now was the host. And she spoke with people, and she did not look for acknowledgement in their faces, and she did not need it. She knew what she had done. She knew what the land was becoming. She knew that Kemp's East Field was draining correctly, and Reed's Orchard was going to produce, and the mill agreement had been signed, and her father's acknowledgement was on the public record. She did not need these people to validate any of that, but she noticed it when they looked at her differently. She noticed the wives who sought her out specifically, who had said nothing in July, and came to her now with the particular manner of women who understood exactly what had been done, and had wanted to say something, and hadn't, and were trying in small ways to correct that. She noticed the men who addressed her as Miss Whitmore, with a formality that acknowledged standing rather than dismissing it. She noticed old Hartley in the corner, watching her work the room, with the expression of a man who had voted correctly and knew it. She noticed Margaret standing near the fireplace in the gray dress she'd worn to the courtroom, composed and contained, maintaining the particular dignity of a woman who had lost something publicly and was not going to collapse about it publicly either. Eleanor crossed the room to her because it was Eleanor's house tonight, and she would not avoid any corner of it. "Good evening," Eleanor said. "Good evening," Margaret said. "The house looks well." "It does," Eleanor agreed. A pause. Margaret looked at the brooch. Eleanor watched her see. It watched the recognition cross her face, and then the decision not to comment, and then something that was almost a nod. "Your mother's color suited her," Margaret said. "It suits you, too." Eleanor looked at her for a moment. "Thank you," she said. She moved on. Nathaniel arrived at 8:30. He came through the front door with the same unhurried, particular stillness he always had, and Eleanor was across the room when he arrived, and she saw him scan the room the way he always did, quickly, completely missing nothing, and find her. And the way his expression settled when he found her was the thing she had been storing up, the thing she planned to keep. She walked to him. He looked at her in the blue dress with her mother's brooch, and she did not need to ask what he thought, because it was on his face in the specific way that Nathaniel Blackwood's face showed things not loudly, not dramatically, but completely to anyone paying enough attention. "You look like yourself," he said. "I know," she said. Finally, he offered his arm. She took it, and they walked into the room together, into the room full of people who had watched, who had waited, who had made their choices in July, and were now witnessing the consequence of those choices. Nobody said anything dramatic. Nobody needed to. The room simply adjusted the way rooms do when something true has entered them. Judge Hartley caught Eleanor's eye across the room and lifted his glass. She lifted hers back. Kemp's son, who had been hired to help with the event, passed by with a tray and gave Eleanor a look that managed, without any visible expression, to communicate enormous satisfaction. She almost laughed. She stood with Nathaniel in the middle of her family's house in her mother's color, with her father's brooch, and her father's land, and her father's truth on the public record, and she felt the specific weight of what the last 3 months had cost her, and what they had returned to her, and she carried both without flinching. Margaret left early, quietly without making it a scene. Eleanor watched her go and felt the complicated thing she had felt reading the letter. Not forgiveness, not the comfortable resolution of a story that tied itself neatly. Something more real than that. The knowledge that things could be true and still be sad. That people could wrong you entirely and still be human. That you could choose not to carry hatred without pretending the wound wasn't there. She turned back to the room. Nathaniel's hand was at the small of her back, a light, steady pressure, the kind that said, "I'm here," without making a performance of it. "All right," he said quietly. "Yes," she said. And she was, fully, completely without qualification. Die. They were the last two people left in the house when the evening ended. The guests had gone, the staff had been dismissed. Mrs. Pruitt had declared the evening a success with characteristic understatement and gone home. The candles were burning low, and the rooms were warm and quiet, and Eleanor sat in the chair by the fireplace, with her shoes off and her hair unpinned, which was where Nathaniel found her when he came back from seeing the last guests out. He sat down across from her. He looked at her for a long moment. "Your father would have enjoyed tonight," he said. "He would have," she said. "He loved a full house. He used to say a house was only doing its job when there were too many people in it." "Sounds right," Nathaniel said. She looked at the fire. "I've been thinking about the spring," she said. "The planting schedule. Kemp and I have been discussing some changes my father had been considering before he died. There are some things I want to implement that he never got to." "Tell me," Nathaniel said. So she told him. She talked about the east field restored and ready for spring planting, about the crop rotation her father had been experimenting with, about the conversations she'd been having with neighboring farmers, about cooperative arrangements that would benefit everyone involved. She talked about the orchard and Reed's plans for it and what she expected from the Gravensteins next August. She talked about the mill agreement and how she thought it could be extended in another 2 years once she'd demonstrated reliability. Nathaniel listened. He asked the right questions. He offered 2 thoughts of his own that were useful and did not offer opinions on the things that were already settled. This was what it was, she thought. This was what the rest of it looked like. Not a dramatic declaration in front of a room full of people. Not a rescue, not a transformation. A man and a woman in a quiet room after a long day talking about what they were going to build and how they were going to build it. She looked at him. "Ask me," she said. He looked at her. "Eleanor," he said. "Yes," she said. "I am going to ask you," he said, "and I want you to know that I'm asking because I want to, not because I think I ought to, and not out of gratitude for anything, and not because of your father, and not because of the land or the mill or any business consideration." He looked at her steadily. "I'm asking because I have not had anyone in my life who talks to me the way you talk to me, and who looks at things the way you look at them, and who fights the way you fight, and I do not want to spend the next year, or the year after that, or any year after that, without you in it." He paused. "Will you marry me? Will you marry?" Eleanor looked at him, at the man who had stood at the edge of a road in July and handed her a coat, who had sat in the corner of rooms and let her run her own case, who had told her things when she asked and corrected himself when she called him on it, who had remembered a promise made to a man with a hat in his hands, who had laughed surprised in an orchard on a gray summer afternoon. "Yes," she said. "I will." He reached across and took her hand. His grip was warm and certain, and she held it back with the same certainty, and the fire burned low, and the house was quiet, and the north property was working, and her father's name was clean, and the land was hers. She was not the woman who had been pushed out into the July evening with no coat and nowhere to go. She was Eleanor Grace Whitmore. She was the rightful heir of Richard Whitmore's land and Richard Whitmore's truth, and she had fought for both with everything she had, and she had won. And the most important man in her life was sitting across from her holding her hand, and she had chosen him as deliberately and as freely as she had chosen everything else in the past 3 months, not because she needed to be saved, but because she had decided he was worth keeping. She looked at the low fire. She looked at Nathaniel. She thought about Gravensteins in August salt shakers in orchards, a girl who used to steal her father's best apples and a man who was going to stand beside her while she grew them back. She had come home. Not to the house had always been there. To herself. And that her father had always said was the only kind of homecoming that mattered.